Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into The Fiction Wizard, presenting to you today. Sorting Hat detected 72 memory blocks on Harry. Amelia Bones stormed Hall with 8 Aurors. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. The Hat screams. The Great Hall of Hogwarts had seen a lot of things in its 1,000-year history. It had seen the Founding Four argue so violently that the enchanted ceiling cracked and rained actual hailstones on a feast. It had seen students duel in the aisles during goblin rebellions when the outside world pressed too close to the castle walls. It had survived 2 wars, 3 headmasters who died in office, and 1 incident involving a Cornish pixie infestation that nobody over 60 would discuss without a stiff drink in hand. But it had never heard the Sorting Hat scream. Not once in 1,000 years. So when it did, when that ancient, patched, dirt-brown hat opened its stitched mouth so wide the brim stretched, and released a sound like a cathedral organ played backwards through a thunderstorm, every person in the great hall went absolutely still. Plates stopped clinking. Ghosts stopped drifting. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath, the flames going perfectly vertical and motionless as the sound rolled up into the enchanted ceiling and scattered the painted stars. Harry Potter stood on the stool with the hat halfway down his forehead, and his hands, resting on his knees, had gone white at the knuckles. He didn't move. He didn't panic. He tilted his head slightly to the left, the way a person does when they're listening to something very faint and very interesting. The hat kept screaming. Professor McGonagall was the first adult to react. She crossed the floor in 4 strides, her robes snapping behind her like a sail catching wind, and grabbed the edge of the hat with both hands, then stopped, because she could feel it too. A vibration running through the old fabric. Not distress, exactly. Something more like alarm. The hat wasn't in pain. It was reporting. "Hat," she said sharply, the way she might address a misbehaving student. "What is happening?" The screaming stopped. The great hall was so quiet that Harry could hear the flutter of the candles resuming their normal dance, could hear a first-year girl 3 students down from him quietly crying into her sleeve, could hear his own heartbeat with unusual clarity. The hat spoke. Its voice was different from the song it had delivered minutes ago, that had been theatrical, warm, a performance polished over centuries. This was stripped of all of that. Flat and urgent and old. "This child," the hat said, "has been obliviated 72 times. Another silence. Longer this time. The kind that has mass to it." Then the great hall erupted. Students were on their feet at all 4 tables. The ghosts bunched together near the ceiling in a cluster of translucent agitation. Hagrid, seated with the staff, knocked over his goblet and didn't notice the pumpkin juice spreading across the table. Dumbledore stood at his high chair with a stillness that was, if you were paying attention, its own form of alarm, the stillness of a man deciding very quickly what to say next. Harry sat on his stool through all of it and waited. McGonagall's hands were still on the hat. Her face had gone a shade of grey-white that aged her 20 years in 6 seconds. She looked at Harry with an expression that was trying to be composed and not quite succeeding. "Potter," she said. "Are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said. He sounded calm. He didn't entirely know why. Some part of him, some deep and unlabeled part, had felt the hat's presence in his mind and had registered not violation but recognition, the sensation of being read accurately for the first time in his life. Like the difference between someone guessing your name wrong for years and someone finally getting it right. What does that mean? 72 times? "It means," the hat said, still addressing the hall at large through its odd approximation of a voice, "that this child's memories have been systematically removed over a period of years using ministry-grade obliviation techniques. The blocks are not accidental. They are not the result of trauma-induced suppression. They are deliberate, layered, and extraordinarily precise. Someone with significant magical skill and access to restricted obliviation methodology has been inside this child's mind repeatedly, and they have taken a great deal." Harry absorbed that. "Right," he said. So, is there a Ravenclaw in me somewhere under all that, or, Gryffindor, the hat bellowed, with a ferocity that made several third-years duck. Harry pulled the hat off his own head, set it neatly on the stool behind him, and walked toward the Gryffindor table with his hands in his pockets while the hall was still processing the last 60 seconds of its existence. Someone at the Gryffindor table started clapping, a red-haired boy, enthusiastic and slightly bewildered, and a few others joined in, uncertain if clapping was the right response to whatever had just happened but needing to do something with their hands. Harry sat down. The red-haired boy leaned across immediately. "Blimey," he said. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Harry said. He looked down the table. The feast hadn't appeared yet. The sorting was technically still happening, though it had ground to a complete halt with 7 students still waiting by the door. "What's your name?" "Ron." "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." "I know," Ron said, and then looked immediately embarrassed about it. "Sorry. That's, obviously I know. Everyone knows." "Sorry. Don't be." Harry looked toward the staff table. Dumbledore had sat back down but his hands, clasped in front of him, were too precisely relaxed. "What do you know about obliviation?" Ron blinked. "What, memory charms?" "Yeah. My dad works at the ministry," Ron said slowly, warming to the topic despite its bizarre context. "Misuse of Muggle artifacts office. But he talks about other departments. Memory charms are regulated. Like, really heavily regulated. You need special authorization to perform them and there's supposed to be records kept of every." He stopped. "Caught up." "Oh. Yeah," Harry said. The sorting resumed, shakily, but Harry wasn't watching it. He was watching Dumbledore, who was leaning toward Professor McGonagall and speaking quietly, and McGonagall, who was listening with an expression like she'd bitten into something that tasted wrong and wasn't sure what it was yet. The feast appeared, great cascading platters of food materializing from nothing, and Harry put food on his plate and ate steadily and thought very clearly about what it meant that someone had been in his head 72 times and he hadn't known, and the thinking had a quality to it that felt new. Sharp. Like a room being lit after years of dimness, not blindingly but steadily, corners becoming visible one by one. He'd had headaches for as long as he could remember. His aunt had called them attention-seeking. He'd had dreams that felt more like memories, vivid and specific and gone completely by morning. He'd assumed everyone had those. He'd had moments, brief, startling moments, when something would flare up inside him and the world would respond to it. A particularly nasty incident with Dudley's gang and a suddenly locked door. A teacher who'd been cruel and whose desk drawers had all burst open simultaneously, scattering her things. He'd assumed he was imagining it or causing it accidentally. 72 times. Harry set down his fork and picked it up again and thought, all right, then. The owl arrived during dessert. It came through one of the high windows with the confident trajectory of a bird that had been told its delivery was urgent and had taken that information seriously. It dropped a scroll directly in front of Dumbledore with a crack of wings and wheeled back out without waiting for a treat. Harry watched Dumbledore open it. Watched the old man's face as he read it. Watched something behind his eyes shift, not fear, exactly, but the cousin of it. Calculation. The rapid assessment of someone who has just learned that the situation they were managing has moved outside the bounds of their management. Dumbledore set the scroll down. "Minerva," he said, his voice carrying a careful warmth. "I think we should." A door banged open at the far end of the hall. Not the main doors, the side door, the one that led to the outer corridors, the one that was supposed to be magically sealed during feast hours and could only be opened by staff or Hogwarts-level authority. 8 people walked in. They wore dragonhide boots and dark red robes with a ministry crest on the left breast, and they moved through the great hall with the particular walk of people who have the legal authority to be exactly where they are and know it. Students scrambled sideways on the benches to make way. 2 of the Aurors, and that's what they were, Harry could see the silver identification plaques at their belts even from 30 yards, peeled off to position themselves at intervals along the walls, not blocking anyone in, but establishing a presence. The woman leading them was short, square-shouldered, and wore her silver hair in a severe bun that made her look like she'd been arguing with the world since birth and was doing well. She had a monocle over her right eye and a face built for skepticism and competence, and she walked toward the staff table with the energy of someone whose time was being wasted and was choosing to deal with it efficiently. Amelia Bones, Ron breathed next to Harry. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Blimey. My dad says she's the one who put 3 Death Eaters away after they claimed Imperius. She doesn't mess about. Dumbledore, Amelia Bones said, without preamble, when she reached the staff table. Her voice was the kind that carried without shouting, the trained projection of someone who had spent decades in interrogation rooms and courtrooms and didn't need volume to make a point. I've received the Hat's alert. I'll need access to the child, access to a private room, and a complete, Amelia. Dumbledore's voice was warm, paternal, carrying that particular register of gentle authority that had been known to end arguments before they properly began. This is a school. These are first-year students who've had a rather startling, I'm aware it's a school, Albus. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was scanning the hall, and her eyes found Harry with the precision of someone who had read a file thoroughly. I'm also aware that I have a credible report of ministry-grade unauthorized obliviation performed on a minor, a specific, named minor with a very specific legal status in the magical world, and that the Hat's protocol requires immediate DMLE response. She picked up the parchment from the staff table where Dumbledore had set it, his parchment, his message, and held it up. Which is what this says, Albus. In writing. From your own castle. McGonagall made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The feast isn't finished, Dumbledore said. There was still warmth in his voice, but underneath it, something else. The warmth of a fire that has encountered wet wood and is having to work harder than it expected. The feast can wait. Amelia Bones set the parchment down. The child cannot. She looked across the hall again. Harry Potter. Harry stood up. He was aware of about 400 people watching him and found he didn't particularly mind. He picked up a bread roll because he hadn't finished eating and felt no reason to be dramatic about it. Here, he said. Come with me, please. Sure. He stepped out from the bench. Looked briefly at Ron, who was staring at him with his mouth slightly open. Save me some treacle tart. Ron stared. Harry followed Amelia Bones out of the great hall. The room she chose was a small one off the third-floor corridor, a disused office with a desk and 4 chairs and a window that looked out onto the darkened grounds. 2 of the Aurors positioned themselves outside the door. One came in, a tall woman with close-cropped hair and alert, quiet eyes who introduced herself as Auror Shacklebolt before standing near the wall in the way that skilled people stand near walls when they want to look like furniture and only moderately succeed. McGonagall arrived 2 minutes later, breathing slightly harder than usual and with the expression of someone who had argued their way out of a conversation quickly and wasn't proud of how they'd done it. Dumbledore did not arrive. Amelia Bones noted his absence without comment, which was itself a form of comment. She sat across from Harry and placed a small crystal sphere on the desk between them, the kind that glowed faintly blue to indicate active legal recording. She looked at him steadily and said, "How are you feeling?" "Curious," Harry said. She almost smiled. "Good. That's a good word." She interlaced her fingers on the desk. "I'm going to tell you what I know, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to know before we start that you are not in any trouble of any kind. You are, in fact, the party that has been wronged here. Do you understand that?" "The Hat said 72, Harry said. "I want to know what that means, exactly. What was taken?" "So do I," she said. "That's why we're here." She reached into her robes and produced a thin folder, not a file, just a few sheets of parchment, but crisp and official. What do you know about obliviation? Ron Weasley told me it's regulated. Heavily. There are supposed to be records. She blinked, the first moment of something that wasn't pure professionalism. You've been here 2 hours? He's in my year. We talked at dinner. Right. She opened the folder. Ron Weasley is correct. Obliviation of any sentient magical being requires authorization from the DMLE. Obliviation of a child under 17 requires 2 separate authorizations, a ministry healer's sign-off, and a written record filed with both the Obliviator's office and the Department of Magical Records. She let that sit for a moment. The Hat's report indicates 72 distinct applications of obliviation magic on your mind, Harry. Performed over a period of what appears to be the last 9 to 10 years. Beginning when you were roughly 18 months old. The number had been abstract before. Now it landed. 18 months old. I was a baby, Harry said. Yes. Who authorized it? Amelia Bones held his gaze. That's what my department is going to find out. I can tell you that there are no official records. No DMLE authorizations. No ministry healer sign-offs. Nothing in the Department of Magical Records. She paused. Which means either the records were destroyed, or the obliviations were performed without authorization at all, which is a criminal offense, or the authorizations exist somewhere they shouldn't. Somewhere like the office of someone powerful enough to hide them, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment with something that might have been respect, if she'd been the type to hand it out easily. She wasn't, so it just looked like attention. Close and serious attention. You're 11, she said. Yeah. Most 11-year-olds would be crying. I'll probably do that later, Harry said pleasantly. Right now I want to understand what happened to me. McGonagall, who had been standing near the window with her hands clasped tightly enough to whiten her knuckles, made a sound like a suppressed cough that was possibly a suppressed sob. Harry glanced at her, and something about her expression, the genuine distress in it, the way she was holding herself together because she felt the situation required it of her, made something in his chest move. You didn't know, he said to her. Not a question. She shook her head once, tightly. I did not. Okay, he said. He meant it. He turned back to Amelia Bones. What happens next? My department opens a formal investigation. We'll need access to you, to perform a proper diagnostic on the memory blocks, to catalog them, and to begin the process of determining whether they can be safely removed. She leaned forward slightly. That last part is your choice, Harry. Completely yours. The blocks are in your mind. Nothing happens to them without your consent. Is that clear? Yes. Good. She sat back. Now. I need to ask you about your living situation. The Muggle family, the Dursleys. Harry's face didn't change. But something behind it did. What about them? He asked. Harry. Her voice was careful in the way that a skilled person's voice is careful, not gentle exactly, but precise. The Hat's diagnostic wasn't limited to the memory blocks. It sent us a full reading. That's standard. The Hat checks health and well-being as part of its sorting function, has done for centuries, though it rarely finds anything concerning enough to flag. She opened the folder to a specific page. Your diagnostic shows evidence of chronic malnutrition over a sustained period. Healed bone fractures in 3 locations consistent with impact injuries. A magical suppression pattern in your core that isn't natural or accidental. She looked up. That last one is particularly interesting. Your magical core should be, given what we can measure even through the blocks, considerably larger and more active than what's presenting. Whatever's causing the suppression has been working against your natural development for years. The room was very quiet. The cupboard, McGonagall said softly. Harry looked at her. Her face had gone back to gray. When I watched your family, when I watched them to assess whether the placement was appropriate, I saw you playing outside, and Petunia put you in." She stopped. Swallowed. "I told Albus. I told him the family was unsuitable. He told me you would be protected there in ways that mattered more than." She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. "I should have pushed harder." "What kind of suppression?" Harry asked Amelia Bones. He was tracking the important pieces. Emotional and environmental, primarily. Sustained emotional trauma combined with deliberate magical deprivation creates a feedback loop in a developing magical child. The core recedes, becomes protective, tamped down. She was watching him carefully. "Has your magic been inconsistent? Difficult to control, or occasionally explosive without apparent cause?" "Yeah." He paused. "But it's been feeling different since the hat. Since it started reading me. Like something is looser." Amelia Bones and the Aurors Shacklebolt exchanged a look. "That's the blocks responding," Shacklebolt said from the wall, the first time he'd spoken. His voice was deep and measured. The hat's diagnostic was thorough enough that it essentially shook them. Like hitting the side of a jammed drawer. "Some of them may begin loosening on their own." "Is that dangerous?" McGonagall asked sharply. "For the people around him, potentially yes," Shacklebolt said. He didn't sound alarmed. He sounded like a man calmly reporting the weather. "For Harry, no. His magic will seek equilibrium. What comes through will be what belongs to him." Harry looked at his hands. He'd noticed it during the walk from the Great Hall, the sensation of something behind his sternum that hadn't been there before, or rather, that had always been there but had been muted, like music playing in a distant room with the door nearly shut. The hat had pushed the door open a crack and now he could hear the music properly and it was much louder than he'd expected. "I want the blocks removed," he said. "Harry," McGonagall started. "All of them. As fast as safely possible." He looked at Amelia Bones. "Can your people do that?" "The removal process takes time," she said. "It's not a single session. The blocks are layered, removing them too fast risks damaging the memories underneath. We'll need a specialist. The best obliviation reversal specialist in the country." She pulled a small card from the folder and slid it across the desk. "Her name is Healer Clearwater. She works out of St. Mungo's. I'd like to arrange for her to come to Hogwarts, on a regular schedule, working through the blocks systematically." Harry looked at the card. "And in the meantime?" he asked. "In the meantime, you go to school," Bones said. "You have classes, make friends, eat properly, 3 meals a day, not what you've been getting, and you let my department do its job." She collected the folder. "And you tell me immediately if anyone at all, tries to talk to you about the investigation, the blocks, the hat, or attempts to discourage you from cooperating with us. Are we clear?" "You mean Dumbledore," Harry said. Another non-smile. "Closer this time." "I mean anyone." "He was outside the door the whole time," Harry said. He'd heard the footsteps arrive and stop about 40 seconds after Amelia Bones had shut the door, and they'd been there since. Steady, patient, slightly heavy, the footfall of someone older than their appearance suggested. "He's still there." Shacklebolt moved to the door without being asked, opened it, and there was Dumbledore in the corridor, his expression one of benign concern carefully assembled around eyes that were doing something much more active. "Albus," said Amelia Bones pleasantly, rising from her chair. "We were just finishing." "Of course." He looked past her to Harry, and his expression did something complicated, fond, regretful, searching. "Harry. I hope this hasn't been too overwhelming. You've had quite a first evening." "It's been interesting," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes did their famous twinkling thing. Harry found, to his own interest, that it didn't work on him the way he suspected it usually worked on people. There was no accompanying warmth, no feeling of being chosen and trusted and safely held. Just a very old, very clever man's trick. "I would like to speak with Harry before he goes to bed," Dumbledore said, directing this at Amelia Bones in the tone of a principal speaking to a local government official, respectful on the surface, subtly establishing hierarchy. "Tonight's conversation is concluded," Amelia Bones said in exactly the tone of a government official who has noticed the attempted hierarchy and isn't participating in it. "Harry needs sleep. We'll establish a formal schedule for Healer Clearwater's visits by end of week." In the meantime, she produced a small card from her robe pocket and handed it to Harry directly, bypassing Dumbledore entirely. "That's my personal contact. I'll me directly. Any time." Harry pocketed it. Dumbledore looked at the pocket. His expression didn't change, but something in the arrangement of his face shifted very slightly, the way the surface of still water shifts when something moves underneath. "Harry," he said, and his voice dropped into its kindest register, the one that sounded like a fire in a warm room, "whatever you've been told tonight, and I'm sure Amelia's intentions are entirely good, I want you to know that everything I have ever done has been with your safety and well-being as my primary concern. I hope you'll give me the opportunity to explain. Did you know about the blocks?" Harry asked. The question sat in the corridor between them, simple and clean and absolutely unmovable. Dumbledore was quiet for 2 full seconds. That was an answer. Not the answer he gave verbally. His verbal answer was something about complexity and context and the weight of difficult decisions, delivered with the aching sincerity of someone who genuinely believed what they were saying, which in some ways was the most troubling thing about it. But the 2 seconds were the real answer, and Harry heard them. "I'll see you tomorrow, Professor," Harry said. He looked at Amelia Bones. "Thank you. Get some sleep," she said. Not warmly, but solidly, in the way of someone who means a thing exactly as they say it. McGonagall appeared at Harry's elbow like she'd materialized there. "I'll walk you to Gryffindor Tower," she said, and her voice was stripped of its usual professional crispness. What remained was rougher and more real, the voice of a woman who taught children for a living and had just understood something that she couldn't unlearn. "Come along." They walked. McGonagall didn't speak for the first 4 corridors. Harry didn't push it. The castle at night was something else entirely from what it had been when they'd walked through it by torchlight an hour ago. The paintings murmured and shifted, the staircases sighed as they moved, and somewhere deep in the stone Harry could feel something vast and old and aware, like the castle itself was paying attention. "I placed you with the Dursleys," McGonagall said finally, "on the staircase between the 2nd and 3rd floors. I watched them for a full day before the placement. I knew they were. I knew Petunia Dursley was not a kind woman. I told Albus. He told me the protection in place would be worth the sacrifice." She said the last word like it tasted wrong. "He said you would be loved and cared for." "He was wrong," Harry said. "Yes." She stopped on the landing and turned to face him, and there was something fierce and sorry in her expression simultaneously. "I should not have deferred. That is on me, Potter, as much as anyone. I am profoundly sorry." Harry looked at her. At the sincerity in her face, the genuine weight of it. "Did you know about the blocks?" he asked. Same question. Different quality. "I did not," she said. "I swear to you, I did not know." He believed her. He wasn't sure why he was good at reading people. Possibly it was a survival skill honed by 10 years of trying to predict Aunt Petunia's moods and Uncle Vernon's tempers, but the certainty was clean and clear. "Then you've got nothing to apologize for," he said. "Not beyond the Dursleys, anyway. And I'll take the apology for that." She blinked. "What?" he said. "You're very..." She stopped. Seemed to recalibrate. "Nothing. Come along." They reached the portrait of the fat lady, who was in a state of high excitement and began peppering McGonagall with questions the moment they arrived, and McGonagall silenced her with a single look that could have stopped a charging hippogriff. "Caput Draconis," McGonagall said. The portrait swung open. The password will change on Sunday. In the meantime, Potter. He stopped in the portrait hole and looked back. You have my support, she said. For whatever it's worth. The investigation. All of it. She paused. And if Albus, if anyone, attempts to dissuade you, I want to know about it. I'll add you to the list, Harry said. He climbed through the portrait hole into the Gryffindor common room. It was packed. Every Gryffindor who'd been at the feast, which was all of them, had apparently decided to be awake and waiting, and the noise that greeted him was considerable. Ron was visible immediately, standing on a coffee table for no clear reason, waving. A girl with enormous brown hair and an expression of intense focus was sitting in the nearest chair with a book open in her lap, a book called Practical Memory Magic and the Ethics of Obliviation, which Harry was confident had not been in her possession 60 minutes ago, which meant she'd gone and found it specifically, which told him something useful about her. There he is, shouted the red-haired twins from across the room in unison. The boy who lived, and caused the hat to have a complete breakdown, in front of the entire school, Harry Potter, said the first twin, jumping off the couch, we're Fred. And I'm George, said the other one, jumping off the same couch from the other side. We're extremely impressed, they said together. I didn't do anything, Harry said. That's the impressive part, said Fred. Or George. One of them. Ron climbed down from the coffee table with dignity. How was it? What did Bones want? What did Dumbledore say? Are you in trouble? You don't look like you're in trouble. You look, he squinted. Normal. You look extremely normal. I'm fine, Harry said. He looked around the room, at the many expectant faces, at the contained energy of 100 people who'd witnessed something unprecedented and were vibrating with the need to know more. He thought about how much to say and decided on honesty, not because it was the safe choice but because it seemed like the right one. The hat found memory blocks in my mind, he said, clearly enough to be heard across the room. The noise dropped. 72 of them. Magical, ministry grade. Someone's been removing pieces of my memory since I was a baby, and nobody told me. He let that settle. Amelia Bones is investigating. It's going to take a while. In the meantime, I'm going to school like a normal person, which, yes, is ironic, given. He looked at Ron. I still want that treacle tart. I saved you 2 pieces, Ron said immediately. The room unfroze. People started talking again, but differently. The loud excited chatter had given way to something more serious, quieter pockets of real conversation, the kind that happens when people understand that something important has actually occurred. The girl with the book got up and walked over with the book still open. Up close she was younger looking than she'd seemed from across the room, with clever eyes and the expression of someone constructing an argument in real time. Hermione Granger, she said, extending her hand. Harry Potter, he said, shaking it. I know. She held up the book. This is from the library. I found it in, well, technically it's a restricted section book, but Professor Flitwick's office door was open and I didn't. That's not important. The point is, I've read the relevant chapters in the last 20 minutes, and I think I understand what the hat found, at least theoretically. The blocks you're describing, layered obliviation performed on a developing magical mind, would have created a specific kind of suppression effect. Your magic would have been working against the blocks consistently, trying to reassert itself, and the energy expenditure from that constant push and pull would explain, Hermione, Ron said. She stopped. What? He just got back from being interrogated by the head of the DMLE. I wasn't interrogated, Harry said. He's also fine, Ron added, gesturing at Harry. I can see that, Hermione said, and she didn't look apologetic, just recalibrated. I was going to suggest that if you want to understand what's happening to you, this is a good starting point. But I can also just, she held out the book, give it to you. If you'd rather read it yourself. Harry took it. "Walk me through the suppression part," he said. "The bit you said about energy expenditure. I want to understand the mechanics." Hermione Granger's face did something that was essentially a sunrise. "Sit down," she said, dropping into the nearest chair and opening to a page she'd marked with a slip of parchment. "It starts with how magical cores develop in early childhood." Basically, Ron dropped onto the couch nearby and pulled out one of the treacle tart slices, which he'd apparently been carrying in his robe pocket with a security that suggested he'd learned, at some point, to always keep food accessible. He handed the second one to Harry. Harry sat. Took the tart. Listened to Hermione Granger explain magical neuroscience with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her entire life for someone willing to actually listen, and ate the tart, and felt, in the corner of his chest where the hat had pushed the door open, the music getting marginally louder. Outside the common room window, far below on the grounds, 8 Aurors were setting up a monitoring perimeter. Amelia Bones was in the Ollery, sending 4 simultaneous communications, to the minister, to the chief witch, to St. Mungo's, and to a sealed records office that was not supposed to exist. And in his office at the top of his tower, Albus Dumbledore sat with his hands folded and stared at the wall and thought very carefully about what came next, while the various silver instruments on his shelves spun and ticked and one small device, shaped like a compass, swung its needle hard toward Gryffindor Tower and stayed there, trembling. Harry felt that too, later, when he was nearly asleep in his dormitory, not as anything he could name or point at, but as a kind of attention. Like someone listening at a door. Like being watched through glass. He turned over. Thought about 72. Thought about 18 months old. Thought about the music getting louder. He went to sleep. Chapter 2, the first unlocking. Harry woke before his dormitory mates with the particular alertness of someone whose body had spent 10 years treating sleep as a light and unreliable thing, something to be maintained carefully, like a small fire in wind. He lay in the 4-poster bed and looked at the canopy and took stock. He felt different. Not dramatically. Not the way people in stories feel different after a revelation, all clarity and transformed purpose. It was subtler than that. Like someone had adjusted the brightness on a room he'd been living in for years, and he was noticing for the first time that he'd been reading in poor light. His head didn't hurt. That was the first thing. The persistent low-grade ache that sat behind his eyes most mornings, which he'd attributed to his glasses prescription being wrong, to Dudley's fists, to everything except what it apparently was gone. Not reduced. Absent. He pressed his fingers against his temples experimentally and felt nothing but his own skin. The second thing was the magic. It was there the way it had always been, the way he'd always been vaguely aware of it, the way you're vaguely aware of your own heartbeat, present, background, unexamined. But the quality of it had changed. It felt pressurized. Not dangerously, not like something about to burst, but like water behind a dam that was developing new cracks, finding exits, testing them, curious about the air on the other side. He got up, got dressed, and went downstairs before anyone else was awake. The common room was empty and amber-lit by the banked fire, and Harry sat in the chair nearest the window with Hermione's borrowed book, which she'd left with him, having apparently already memorized the relevant sections, and read until the portraits in the corridor outside started their morning conversations and the smell of breakfast drifted up from somewhere far below. The book was dense but clear, written by a healer named Elidora Prentice who had apparently spent 40 years reversing accidental obliviations and had strong opinions about the ethics of the practice that she did not bother to contain. Harry read the chapter on developmental suppression twice. What she described matched what Shacklebolt had said. When obliviation was applied to a developing magical child, particularly in the first years of life, when the core was still forming, still learning what it was, the blocks didn't just remove memories. They interfered. Magic was not separate from memory or identity, Prentice argued, which was why ministry regulations on child obliviation were so strict. The memories and the magical self were the same thing, built from the same material, and removing pieces of one deformed the other. 72 applications. In the margins of the relevant page, Hermione had written in small, precise handwriting, "This means the suppression on your core isn't separate from the blocks, it is the blocks. Remove the blocks, remove the suppression." Harry looked at that for a while. Then Ron came downstairs in his pajamas looking like he'd fought his pillow and lost, and Harry closed the book. "You've been awake for hours, haven't you?" Ron said, dropping into the opposite chair. "Yeah. Right." Ron rubbed his face. "Okay. So. My mom is going to absolutely lose her mind when she hears about this. In the good way. In the furious on your behalf way. She does that. She did it when Percy got detention unfairly in third year and she wrote 17 letters to Dumbledore." 17, Harry said. "Over 3 days." Ron shook his head admiringly. "She's terrifying when she's righteous." "Good to know." Harry paused. "Do you think your dad could find out anything?" "At the ministry. About the authorization records." Ron went still in the careful way of someone whose brain had just engaged properly. "He works in misuse of Muggle artifacts." "That's not, I mean, he wouldn't have access to DMLE records directly. But he knows people who do." "Yeah." Ron chewed his lip. "He knows a lot of people. He's been there forever." He looked at Harry with an expression that was trying to be casual and not quite managing it. "You're already investigating. Like, yourself." "Amelia Bones is investigating," Harry said. "I'm thinking. There's a difference." He paused. "Though hopefully there won't be one for long." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the simplicity of someone who has decided a thing and doesn't need to decorate it, "I'll write to Dad today." "Thanks," Harry said. Breakfast was loud. The Great Hall had achieved a particular variety of noisy that morning, not the comfortable eating and talking noise of normal mealtimes but the charged, slightly higher-pitched noise of 400 people who all had something specific to discuss and were discussing it simultaneously. Harry walked in with Ron and felt the attention the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure, broad and impersonal but impossible to ignore. He sat down and reached for toast and poured himself pumpkin juice and did not acknowledge the staring. Susan Bones sat down across from him. She was small and round-faced with reddish-blonde hair and the kind of steady, direct expression that suggested she came from a family where people said what they meant. She put her plate down firmly and looked at Harry. "I'm Susan Bones," she said. "My aunt is Amelia Bones." "I know," Harry said. "You're in Hufflepuff." "Yes." She picked up her fork. "She sent me a message this morning. She wanted me to tell you that Healer Clearwater has agreed to come on Saturday." She said it in the brisk, professional way of someone delivering information, not making conversation. "Also that the perimeter Aurors will be on the grounds through the week as a precaution, and that you should treat them as furniture." "Furniture," Harry repeated. "That's what she said." Susan speared a piece of sausage. "She also said that if anyone bothers you, at all, I have authority to send a message directly to her office." She looked up. "You've been bothered already, haven't you?" "Define bothered." "Dumbledore's been in the corridor outside Gryffindor Tower since 6 this morning," she said. One of the Aurors noted it. Ron put down his goblet. Harry picked up his toast. "He's worried," he said. "That's reasonable. It's his school and one of his students turns out to have 72 memory blocks. If I were him, I'd be worried too." "If you were him, you'd know why they were there," Susan said. "A beat." "True," Harry agreed. "My aunt is good at this," Susan said, and for the first time the professional quality cracked slightly, just enough to show what was underneath, a 12-year-old girl who was fiercely proud of someone she loved. "She doesn't lose. I thought you should know that." "I believe it," Harry said. He looked at her steadily. "You're going to be in the middle of all this, you know." Because of your name. That's going to be uncomfortable. It's already uncomfortable, Susan said. That's fine. I'm comfortable with uncomfortable. She picked up a piece of toast. Eat your breakfast. Harry smiled. It felt like something he hadn't used in a while, not the performance of it, the polite closed-mouth thing he'd used with teachers and neighbors and people he needed not to notice him. The real one. It felt like a muscle being tested. Hermione arrived, sat down beside Ron without appearing to notice she'd chosen a seat, and opened a notebook. I've been thinking about the suppression mechanics. I talked to Professor Flitwick this morning, he was in the corridor, I just asked, and he confirmed that the blocks would act as a kind of continuous magical drain. Do you feel anything different this morning? The headache's gone, Harry said. She wrote something down immediately. Interesting. The diagnostic pressure from the hat may have destabilized the outermost blocks sufficiently to partially, yes, that tracks. The outermost blocks would be the most recent ones, which means they'd contain, what? Memories from age 9, 10? Do you have any new memories this morning? Anything that surfaced? Harry had, actually. He'd half dismissed it when he woke, filed it under the general category of dreams. But it hadn't had the texture of a dream. It had been too specific. Too solid. My mum's kitchen, he said. Red tiles. She was making something, I don't know what, and there was music on the wireless and I was very small, but I was doing something with my hands and the music was responding to it. Getting louder when I reached for it. Like I could touch the volume. Hermione's pen stopped moving. You were 3, she said quietly. Maybe 4. That's toddler obliviation range. I know. She looked at him. There was something in her face that was working hard not to be angry on his behalf. He appreciated the effort. The anger was there anyway, clean and righteous and precisely directed. We're getting them all back, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. We are. The first week of classes was, despite everything, exactly what it was supposed to be, overwhelming in the way that all new things are overwhelming, full of information and faces and a castle that seemed to reorganize itself out of spite. Harry threw himself into it. Not as a distraction. Not as a way to avoid thinking about the investigation, he thought about it constantly, in the particular background processing way that his brain had apparently always been capable of and had simply never been given room to run. He threw himself into classes because they were genuinely interesting, because he was finding, to his own surprise, that he was good at this, better than he'd expected and better than his Muggle school record had suggested. In Transfiguration, McGonagall demonstrated turning a match into a needle and told them to attempt it. Harry turned his into a needle in 30 seconds and then, without quite meaning to, turned it back. And then into a slightly different needle, longer, silver instead of steel. McGonagall walked past his desk, looked at what he'd done, said nothing, and wrote something in her notebook. In Charms, Flitwick's enthusiastic introduction to the Wingardium Leviosa charm produced results for Harry on the second attempt that made the feather in question rise to the ceiling and stay there until he deliberately brought it back down. Hermione, who had achieved it on the 4th attempt and was visibly pleased with herself, looked at Harry's feather near the ceiling and then at Harry with a speculative expression. The blocks, she said. Probably, he said. It's going to get more pronounced as more of them loosen. She lowered her voice. You should be careful in practical classes. Not hide it, just, be aware. I'm not hiding anything, Harry said, and something in his voice made her look at him sideways. I didn't mean hide it as in be ashamed, she said carefully. I meant, people will have reactions. Teachers, students. People can have reactions, Harry said. That's their business. I'm not going to manage my magic to make other people comfortable. She thought about that. Okay, she said. Then, with the focused honesty that was becoming her most characteristic quality, that's probably the right call. Potions was different. Snape was, Harry had heard warnings, from both the twins and Ron's older brother Percy, who had delivered them in the tone of someone who has survived a natural disaster and feels a duty to warn others. He was prepared for unpleasantness. What he wasn't prepared for was the specific quality of Snape's attention, the way it settled on Harry from the moment he walked through the dungeon door with the intensity and temperature of something personal. "Potter," Snape said, when he reached Harry's name in the register. He paused on it, not the dramatic pause of someone playing to the room, but the pause of someone examining an object for defects. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. Snape's eyes narrowed. He moved on through the register. The lesson itself was theory, no practical work, just an introduction to the principles of potion making, which Harry found genuinely interesting in the same way he found anything systematic interesting. He took notes in the small, precise handwriting that he'd developed over years of doing homework on bad paper with bad pens borrowed from Dudley's discards, and he listened, and when Snape began his opening interrogation, the rapid-fire questions designed to demonstrate ignorance and establish dominance, Harry answered the first one put to him. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood, Potter?" "Draught of living death," Harry said, without hesitation, because Hermione had given him her copy of 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi to read on Tuesday night and he'd read it, and because the question was straightforward. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. It's in the restricted potions category." Snape looked at him. "Where would you look," Snape said, his voice very even, "if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat," Harry said. "It counteracts most poisons. You probably keep them in that cabinet on the left wall." The class was very quiet. "Monkshood," Snape said. "What is it, and what is its other name?" "It's also called wolfsbane and aconite," Harry said. "It's poisonous, it's used in some potions, including wolfsbane potion, and I believe you use the root." Snape was still for a moment. His expression had not changed, which was itself a kind of expression. He turned away. "It seems that celebrity has its benefits," he said to the class, his voice carrying just enough contempt to be deniable. "However, I would caution Mr. Potter against confusing book knowledge with competence." "Of course," Harry said pleasantly. Snape turned back very slowly. Harry held his gaze with the calm steadiness that he'd developed over years of not being allowed to look away from Vernon Dursley's anger, because looking away made it worse. He wasn't performing it. He wasn't being defiant for the sake of it. He was just, not afraid. He'd assessed Snape in the first 30 seconds, the way he'd learned to assess adults quickly and accurately, and had found a man with a grievance, considerable intelligence, and the specific cruelty of someone who has been powerless at some important point in their life and is determined not to be again. He was not a threat. He was uncomfortable, and Harry had survived uncomfortable. "Indeed," Snape said. He moved on. Ron let out a breath beside Harry that he'd apparently been holding for the last 2 minutes. Saturday arrived with September rain drumming against the windows and a castle that smelled of wet stone and wood smoke. Healer Clearwater came through the main gates at 9 in the morning accompanied by an Auror escort and a large professional bag, and she was not what Harry had been expecting. He'd been expecting someone clinical. Someone who moved through hospital corridors with efficient detachment, the kind of professional who treats you like a case file because it's easier that way. What arrived in the small room off the hospital wing, the same room where Madame Pomfrey stored her more unusual equipment, was a woman of about 60 with dark skin, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and an expression of focused warm intelligence that made Harry trust her in about the same time it took to shake her hand. "Harry Potter," she said, looking at him directly. "I'm Cordelia Clearwater. I've been reversing obliviations for 31 years. I've seen complicated cases, deliberate cases, accidental cases, cruel cases." She sat down across from him and set her bag on the floor. "Yours is the most extensive I have ever encountered. I want you to understand that before we begin, because I don't want you to be surprised." She paused. And I want to know if you have any questions before we start. How does the removal work? Harry asked. I locate each block using a diagnostic wand technique. You'll feel a light scanning sensation, not unpleasant. I can see them the way a healer can see a bone fracture, more or less. Once located, I work on the outermost layer, the most recent blocks, and I essentially dissolve the magical binding that holds the obliviation in place. The memory underneath reasserts itself. It can be disorienting. Sometimes it comes back in a rush, sometimes slowly over a few hours. She looked at him steadily. The emotional content comes back with the memory. That's important to understand. Some of what's in those blocks may be significant. You should have someone you trust nearby afterward. Okay, Harry said. I also need to tell you, she said, and her voice shifted slightly, becoming more precise, that as the blocks dissolve, your magical core is going to respond. I've discussed this with Aurors Shacklebolt, and he's positioned accordingly. The releases may be gradual or they may be sudden. Your magic will be looking for equilibrium after years of suppression, and finding it may be visible. Understood, Harry said. Amelia Bones was in the corner of the room, standing against the wall with a small notebook. McGonagall was outside in the corridor, stationed there ostensibly to ensure no students wandered into the wing, but Harry was fairly sure it was also because she needed to be near this in some way she couldn't fully articulate. Shacklebolt was near the window. Ready? Clearwater asked. Yes, Harry said. She raised her wand. It was pale, almost white, some unusual wood Harry didn't recognize, and moved it in a slow arc through the air between them. Harry felt it immediately, a gentle pressure, like fingers lightly pressing all around the inside of his skull. Not painful. Not even unpleasant, really. More like being measured. Taken seriously. There they are, Clearwater murmured, and her voice had changed into the half-present tone of a professional doing something complex, present enough for safety but most of their attention elsewhere. 72. Beautiful work, if, she stopped. Something had shifted in her expression. Amelia. What? Bones was at her shoulder in 3 steps. The technique, Clearwater said. The binding methodology on these blocks. This isn't standard ministry work. This is specialized. Academic-level obliviation. This took someone who didn't just perform the blocks, they designed the framework. These are architecturally sophisticated. Each one is load-bearing. She lowered her wand slightly. If these had been done carelessly, by someone with ordinary ministry authorization, they would have collapsed in on each other years ago. The fact that they held requires real expertise. The kind of expertise only a handful of people in Britain have. Bones was writing very fast. Can you identify the caster? Potentially. The style has signatures, like handwriting. She refocused. But first, Harry, I'm going to begin with block 72. The most recent. Are you ready? Yes, Harry said, and meant it. Clearwater raised her wand again. The pressure in Harry's head changed, shifted from a general scan to something targeted, something that felt like a finger finding the exact location of a bruise and pressing. Not painfully. Precisely. Then the world went briefly sideways. The memory didn't arrive gradually. It came in like a wave, complete, immediate, sensory. He was 5 years old and in the Dursleys' kitchen and there was something burning on the stove that Petunia had forgotten about, and Dudley was about to touch it, and Harry had put his hand out without thinking, and the pot had moved, simply moved, slid across the stove away from Dudley's reaching hand, and then a man had appeared. Not through the door. He'd appeared, in the way that adults sometimes did in Harry's memories, with a sound like displaced air, and he'd had kind eyes behind half-moon glasses and he'd said, I'm sorry about this, Harry. And then the memory went white. Harry came back to the room in the hospital wing to find that his hands were gripping the chair arms with sufficient force to have split the wood along one side, and that the window across the room had blown open despite being latched, and that outside the wind had picked up in a perfect circle around the castle in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Shacklebolt was watching him with calm attention. "You're all right," he said. "Not a question. Not reassurance. Just a fact, offered." Harry breathed. The rage was specific. Targeted. It wasn't the diffuse distress of someone overwhelmed. It was the clear, cold anger of someone who has understood something precisely. He'd moved that pot at 5 years old, spontaneously, in an act of accidental magic so well-intentioned it was almost funny, and within what, an hour? Less? Someone with kind eyes had appeared and taken it from him. "He said sorry," Harry said. His voice was level. Before he blocked it. "He said sorry." Clearwater looked at him with an expression that was trying to stay professional and finding it difficult. "You're sure?" "Yes." He relaxed his grip on the chair. The wood cracked slightly further. He looked at it and looked away. "He didn't want to do it," he said. That's what the sorry was about. He felt bad. He paused. He did it anyway. Bones said nothing, but her pen had stopped moving and the quality of her stillness was the quality of a woman recalibrating something significant. "The caster," Harry said to Clearwater. "The one with the signature. Who are the handful of people in Britain with that expertise?" Clearwater looked at Bones. Something passed between them, the specific look of two professionals who have reached the same conclusion simultaneously and are deciding who says it. "Let's do a few more," Clearwater said. "Before we start naming names, I want to be certain." "Fair enough," Harry said. "Do the next one." They removed 4 blocks that morning. Each one came back differently. One arrived as sound, his mother's voice, singing something he didn't recognize, something warm and private and gone before he could catch its melody, which was almost worse than not having it. One came back in fragments, shattered pieces of something that had been whole, a room he'd been in often enough to know it was home without being able to say where it was. One came back with a smell, something herbal and warm, a garden, hands in dirt, his father's voice saying something about patience. And the fourth one. The fourth one came back with enough force that Shacklebolt took 3 steps toward Harry instinctively, and every candle in the room blew out simultaneously, and the stones in the wall breathed. He was 3 years old and in a room he didn't recognize, not the Dursleys, not his parents' house, something neutral and plain, and there were 2 people in the room with him and one of them was his mother, who looked like she'd been crying for a long time and had decided to stop, and the other was a man Harry had never seen before in any of his memories. Short, neat, gray hair, a face built for precision. He had a wand in his hand and he was looking at Harry with the expression of someone doing something they understand is wrong and have found a justification for. His mother was saying, "Just, be gentle. Please. Be gentle with him." And the man said, "It's the only way, Lily. Dumbledore is certain." And his mother closed her eyes and turned away and said, "I know. I know that. Just, please." Harry came back to the room and the candles were out and he was standing. He didn't remember standing up. He was in the middle of the room and the air around him was doing something that wasn't wind, more like pressure, radiating outward, not threateningly but undeniably, the way heat radiates from a fire. "Harry," Clearwater said, from where she'd pressed herself carefully against the far wall. Her voice was professional and calm. "I need you to breathe." He breathed. The pressure eased. The candles relit themselves, all at once. "Good," she said. She came back to her chair. "Good. That was a strong one." "He said Dumbledore is certain," Harry said. "The man with the gray hair. He said it like Dumbledore was the reason." "What did the man look like?" Bones asked. She was still against the wall, notebook up, pen moving. Harry described him. Precisely. He was good at observation, he'd been good at it for years, tracking threats, cataloging people's expressions and habits. He gave her height, build, hair, approximate age, the way the man held his wand, the specific cut of his robes, the fact that there was a ministry identification badge on his left breast that Harry had been too young to read. Bones stopped writing. "That's Aldous Croker," she said. "Who?" "Department of Mysteries." Her voice was very controlled. "He runs the thought division." She closed her notebook with a deliberate click. "He doesn't just have the expertise. He wrote half the foundational literature on memory architecture." She looked at Clearwater. "Is that consistent with what you're seeing?" "Very," Clearwater said quietly. "And Dumbledore sent him," Harry said. No one disagreed. Harry sat back down. He thought about 4 blocks out of 72, and what they'd contained. Half of what he'd recovered was emotional wreckage, pieces of people he'd loved before he'd had the language for love. The other half was a picture of how this had worked, systematically, carefully, with genuine expertise and genuine regret, and complete disregard for whether regret was sufficient. "I want to know something," he said. "Go ahead," Bones said. "The suppression on my magic, the emotional trauma angle, the Dursleys." He looked at her steadily. "Was that accidental? Did it just happen because they were unpleasant people? Or was there specific kind of unpleasantness useful to whoever planned this?" The room was quiet. "That," Bones said slowly, "is a very good question. Because the memory blocks alone should have handled most of the power suppression," Harry said. He'd been thinking about this since reading Hermione's note in the margin of Prentice's book. "That's what the research says, blocks on a developing core suppress the magic as a side effect. You don't also need the child to be miserable in a specific way. Unless..." He paused. "Unless the blocks were never intended to be permanent. Unless they were designed to be removed eventually, the release controlled, at a time and in a way that someone else managed. And the environment was a backup. An insurance policy. To keep the core down even if the blocks deteriorated naturally." Clearwater made a soft sound that was not quite a word. "What?" Harry said. "These blocks were not designed to deteriorate," she said carefully. "They were designed to hold indefinitely. Which means..." She stopped. "Which means someone else was supposed to remove them," Harry finished. "On their own schedule. Not now. Not at the sorting. Something went wrong with the plan." "Or," Bones said, and her voice had the quality of someone turning over a stone and looking at what's underneath it, "the hat wasn't part of the plan." Silence. Then Harry said, "It scans for health and well-being. Has done for centuries. Whoever planned this underestimated a 1,000-year-old piece of enchanted haberdashery." Something almost like a laugh from Shacklebolt, very brief and very dry. "We're done for today," Clearwater said firmly, gathering her things. "4 blocks is the safe limit for a first session. We reconvene next Saturday, same time." She looked at Harry. "How are you feeling?" "Genuinely angry," Harry said. "But that's useful. I know what to do with it." She nodded, as if that was the right answer. "Eat something when you get back to your dormitory. The process is magically taxing, your body needs treacle tart," Harry said. She blinked. "I have a friend," he said, "who always has treacle tart." He stood up. "Thank you, Healer Clearwater." "Saturday," she said. He found Hermione and Ron in the library, which was where Hermione spent most of her free time and where Ron had apparently decided to be on the basis that Hermione was there, and he found her organizational habits comforting. They had a table in the corner near a window with a view of the lake, and when Harry arrived Hermione looked up from 4 open books and immediately closed them all and pushed them to one side. "How was it?" she asked. Harry sat down. "Told them." Ron's face went through several expressions during the telling, shock, anger, a sustained fury during the part about Harry's mother turning away, and then a very red-faced, very Weasley kind of controlled outrage at the end. "Dumbledore sent someone from the Department of Mysteries," he said, his voice tight. "Croaker," Hermione confirmed, who had pulled one of her books back out and was cross-referencing. "Aldous Croaker. He's published 3 academic papers on memory architecture. He's also, hold on," she flipped pages. "He's on the Board of Governors for Hogwarts. As a non-executive advisor." "Of course he is," Harry said. "So he's connected to the school," Hermione said. "He has access. He's been coming here for years legitimately and no one would," she stopped herself. Took a breath. "What are you going to do?" "Bones is investigating Croaker," Harry said. "That's her job, and she's good at it. What I'm going to do is go to class on Monday, and remove 4 more blocks next Saturday, and keep paying attention." He looked at them both. "The best thing I can do right now is be here. Learn this world. Build something in it." He paused. "Because whoever planned this was counting on me not knowing it. They put me with muggles deliberately, gave me nothing, kept me ignorant and small. The best answer to that is to not be ignorant and not be small." Ron nodded, with the decisive bob of someone who is fully committed. "Right. Okay. What do we need to learn?" "Everything," Harry said. Hermione pulled all 4 books back out. That evening, walking back from the library through the 6th-floor corridor, Harry felt it. Not a threat. Not danger, exactly. More like, attention again. The same sensation he'd had falling asleep on his first night, the feeling of being watched through glass. He stopped walking. The corridor was empty. He turned in a slow circle and looked at nothing in particular. "I know you do that," he said, to the empty corridor. "The watching thing. I'm going to figure out how you do it eventually, so you might as well stop." The corridor said nothing. But the temperature changed, very slightly, in the way it changes when a large, warm presence retreats. Harry watched the empty air for a moment longer. Then he kept walking, and behind him the corridor lights burned steadier and higher than they had any particular reason to, and the castle made a sound in its foundations that was too low to hear and too present to ignore, a sound like a very old building noticing someone for the first time in a very long time. In his pocket, Amelia Bones's card was warm. He pulled it out and looked at it. Then he went to find an owl. Chapter 3, What James Knew. The letter came on a Wednesday. Harry was in the middle of breakfast when the owls arrived, the usual morning cascade of them, wings and wind and the soft chaos of birds finding their people, and he almost missed it because the owl that brought his letter was not a school owl or anything grand. It was a small, battered-looking thing with one ear slightly torn, and it landed directly in his porridge with the confidence of a bird that had never once considered whether its timing was convenient. Harry extracted it. The owl accepted a piece of bacon with dignity and left. The envelope was ministry-stamped, official red wax, but the handwriting on the outside was not Amelia Bones's. It was rounder, warmer, slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who wrote quickly because they had a lot to say and not enough time to say it. Mr. Harry Potter, Gryffindor Tower, Hogwarts. From the desk of Arthur Weasley, Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, Ministry of Magic. Ron appeared at Harry's elbow immediately. "Is that from Dad?" "Yeah." "What does it say?" Harry opened it and they both read it at the same time, Ron tilting sideways with his chin nearly on Harry's shoulder. Arthur Weasley's letter was 3 pages long and written with the specific controlled energy of someone who had several things to say and was choosing their words carefully because they were aware they were putting them in writing. He began with warmth, hoped Harry was settling in, delighted to hear he and Ron were getting on, Molly sent her best and had made a fruitcake that would follow by separate owl, and then shifted, in the second paragraph, into something quite different. He had made inquiries. Carefully, he said, and through channels that he trusted. He'd spoken to a friend in the Department of Magical Records, he didn't name the friend, who had confirmed that there were no authorization records in the standard DMLE files for any obliviation performed on a minor named Harry James Potter. None. Not one. Which should have been impossible under the regulations established after the last war, regulations that had been specifically designed to prevent the ministry's wartime obliviation apparatus from being used against civilians, including children, without oversight. Then Arthur Weasley wrote something that made Harry go very still. There are, however, records in a sealed subarchive under the office of the Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. These records require dual authorization to access, the Chief Warlock and either the Minister for Magic or the head of the DMLE. I was told about their existence by my friend, who came across a reference to them accidentally and thought it worth flagging to someone he trusted. He does not know what they contain. What I can tell you is that the Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot since 1970 has been Albus Dumbledore. I am telling you this because I believe you deserve to know, and because I believe in doing the right thing even when it is inconvenient. I am also telling Amelia Bones directly, in a separate communication sent this morning. She should have this information. Look after yourself, Harry. Eat properly. My son tells me you've been skipping dinner. Don't. Arthur Weasley. Harry folded the letter. Right, said Ron. He's already sent it to Bones, Harry said. Dad's like that. Once he decides something's right, he just does it. Ron's ears had gone red. Not with embarrassment, with something more like pride. He's going to get in trouble for this. If Dumbledore finds out he's been digging. Your dad knows that, Harry said. Yeah. Ron looked at the letter. He did it anyway. Harry looked at the letter too. Then he put it in his robe pocket. Eat your breakfast, he said. Amelia Bones arrived at Hogwarts on Thursday. She did not send advance notice. She did not request a meeting room from Dumbledore's office or follow the standard protocol for ministry visits to the school. She came through the gates with 2 Aurors at 9 in the morning while Harry was in Transfiguration, and the message she sent up to him via Professor McGonagall, who had read it, set it down, and handed it to Harry with an expression that gave nothing away, said only, library. 11 o'clock. Bring Weasley's letter. McGonagall caught his eye as he tucked the note away. Go, she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. I'll note you present for the whole session. He went. Bones had commandeered a private reading room off the main library floor, a small, glass-windowed space normally used for quiet study groups, which she had apparently cleared by the simple method of opening the door and looking at its previous occupants until they decided to be elsewhere. She was sitting at the narrow table with a folder considerably thicker than the one she'd had on his first night, and the 2 Aurors were outside the glass in the corridor in the same furniture mode as always. Harry sat down across from her. Passed her the letter. She read it. She already knew its contents. Arthur Weasley's parallel communication had presumably reached her yesterday, but she read it again with the careful attention of someone verifying. Then she set it down and looked at Harry. The sealed sub-archive, she said. I've known about it for 2 years. It was established under a wartime emergency provision in 1973, and Dumbledore had the authority to create it. She paused. He did not, however, have the authority to maintain it beyond the end of the war, which was 1981. It should have been dissolved and its contents transferred to standard records. It wasn't. He kept it, Harry said. He kept it. She opened the folder. I have a Wizengamot hearing scheduled for next Tuesday. I'll be petitioning for dual authorization to open the archive. The minister is, she chose her next word the way you choose a tool, aware of the situation. Will he cooperate? Something in her face that wasn't quite a smile. Minister Fudge cooperates with things that threaten to become public scandals if he doesn't. She folded her hands. He's very motivated by potential public scandals. Good, Harry said. Then, what did you want to meet about? Specifically. I spoke with Healer Clearwater after Saturday's session. She's been analyzing the signature she found on the blocks. Bones pulled a sheet from the folder. She's confirmed the primary caster is Croaker. But she also found a secondary signature. A second caster. Someone who was present for a portion of the obliviations, not all of them. Perhaps 20 of the 72. Harry waited. The secondary signature is consistent with someone who doesn't perform obliviation professionally, Bones said. The technique is correct but imprecise, emotional, even. Like someone following instructions they've memorized under duress. She looked at him carefully. Clearwater believes it's a family member. The Great Hall came back to him. The way Hermione had said some of what's in those blocks may be significant. The way his mother had turned away in the memory. My mum, he said. Bones neither confirmed nor denied. We don't have enough data yet to be certain. But I wanted you to hear this from me, directly, before the next session. Saturday's removal may bring back memories that are complicated. In terms of what they show about the people involved. My mother performed some of the obliviations on me, Harry said. Not angrily. Working through the shape of it. Possibly, Bones said. If so, the memory you recovered already, of her turning away, of the language she used, suggests it wasn't willing. Not fully. She was manipulated, Harry said. We don't know that yet. I know, Harry said. He meant it as a statement of what he personally knew, separate from what was provable. He thought about that kitchen memory, red tiles, warm music, his mother's face. The way she'd looked in the second memory, the one with Croaker. The shadows under her eyes. She was trying to protect me. From what, is the question. Bones gathered the folder. There's something else I need to tell you, and I want you to be prepared for it. When we open the archive, if we open the archive, I expect to find communications between Dumbledore and several parties. Including your parents. She paused. What we find may require you to understand your parents as people who made choices. Some of those choices may be difficult to reconcile. They were people, Harry said simply. Not saints. People make bad decisions when they're scared. He looked at her. Doesn't mean they didn't love me. Amelia Bones looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone filing something carefully away. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. Saturday's session started at 9 and ran until nearly noon. Clearwater arrived looking focused and prepared, and she'd brought a second healer, a younger man named Prakash who said very little but moved around the room with quiet efficiency, setting up what appeared to be diagnostic instruments at intervals. Shacklebolt was in his usual spot by the window. Bones was in the corner. And McGonagall had stopped pretending she was there for any reason other than the real one and was sitting in a chair by the door with her hands in her lap. 4 more blocks. That was the plan. The first 2 were distant, early childhood, sensory fragments. The smell of a specific room, his father's hands, large and certain, lifting him. The sound of laughter that was high and clear and male and young and nothing like the images Harry had formed of James Potter from 10 years of Petunia's contemptuous descriptions. Harry held both of those memories very carefully, the way you hold something small and fragile that you found unexpectedly, not crushing, not clutching. The third block was different. It landed not as a sensory fragment but as a full scene, and it hit with the completeness of something that had been held under pressure for years. He was 4 years old and in a room that felt like a study, books, a cluttered desk, the smell of ink and old paper and something faintly herbal. His father was there. James Potter. And James Potter was furious. Not at Harry. Harry was in the corner of the room, sitting on a rug with a picture book, and the fury in the room was so large and so real that even at 4 years old Harry had made himself small and still and had watched from behind the book. James was arguing with Dumbledore. No, James said. His voice was shaking with the effort of keeping it controlled. Absolutely not. We've already, what you asked before, with Croaker, that was, Lily hasn't, she's not the same since, Albus. What you're asking her to do, to her own son, it's, James. Dumbledore's voice was patient and warm and utterly immovable. The prophecy is specific. If Voldemort discovers the extent of Harry's abilities at this age, the prophecy is a piece of verse that a woman said in a pub while in a trance, James said. I'm not erasing my son's mind because of a piece of verse from a pub. The protections I have in place will hold, Dumbledore said. But they require Harry's core to be contained. If his power continues developing at this rate, the suppression of the blood wards will be insufficient. He needs the blocks, James. He's 4 years old, James said, and his voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, and he turned away. It is temporary, Dumbledore said. When the time is right, when Voldemort is dealt with, when Harry is older and can be trained properly, we will restore everything. Every memory. Every piece of what's been locked away. I give you my word. Your word, James said, to the window. My word, Dumbledore said. Gentle. Certain. This is the sacrifice that protects him, James. Everything else, the blood wards, the Fidelius, all of it, it layers. It compounds. The greatest protection we can give him is to make him, for now, less than what he is. So that those who would take him cannot see his true value. A long silence. Then James said, quietly, without turning around, if you're wrong about any part of this, Albus, if a single block is still in his head when he's grown, I will personally see to it that the Wizengamot knows every detail of what you've had done. I am not wrong, Dumbledore said. Harry came back to the room to find that he'd knocked his chair backwards at some point and was sitting on the floor, which he didn't remember happening, and that the window behind Shacklebolt had spiderwebbed with cracks radiating from the center in a perfect geometric pattern, and that the diagnostic instruments Prakash had set up were all reading at their maximum and 2 of them had gone past it and stopped working. Nobody spoke immediately. Harry looked at the cracked window. He looked at his hands. He looked at the ceiling, the ancient stone, and thought about his father at a window saying if you're wrong about any part of this. He'd said it knowing he was asking Dumbledore to promise the impossible. He'd said it like a man who had agreed to something he couldn't refuse and was drawing the only line he had left. James knew, Harry said. Harry, McGonagall started. He knew. He didn't want it. He argued. Harry put his hand flat on the floor. The cold of the stone was specific and grounding. He was told it was temporary. He was told it would be restored when the time was right. He looked up. And then he died. And the time was never right. And nobody told me. The room was very quiet. Dumbledore outlived the people who knew what he'd promised, Harry said. He outlived the people who would have held him to it. He said it without accusation, working through logic. Understanding the shape of the thing. He may have intended to do it. Restore everything when I was older. He may have genuinely believed that was the plan. Harry, Bones said from the corner. But he also chose not to, Harry said. He had years. He knew where I was. He sent me letters through McGonagall. He glanced at McGonagall, who was white to the lips. He could have sent Clearwater at any point. He chose not to. So either he forgot his promise, or he changed his mind, or he decided the blocks were still serving a useful purpose with me alive and Voldemort not quite gone. He paused. Which one do you think it is? Bones said, I think it may be all 3 at different times. Harry nodded. He stood up. Righted the chair. Sat back in it. The 4th block, he said to Clearwater. Let's do it. Harry, Clearwater said carefully. 3 in a session is already, the emotional content of what you just processed. I'm all right, he said. Not defensively. Accurately. He was angry, yes. He was grieving something he hadn't had the language to grieve before, a version of his father he hadn't known existed, someone who had fought and failed and loved him enough to try. He held both of those things simultaneously. I want the fourth one. Clearwater looked at him for a long moment, running the actual professional assessment, and then she raised her wand. The fourth block was small. Not insignificant, small in duration, a moment rather than a scene, a fragment of a larger thing. He was very young, barely more than a baby, and his mother was holding him and her cheek was against his hair and she was speaking too quietly to hear properly except for one thing, 3 words, said with such specific force that they'd survived in this fragment alone, cut off from whatever came before and after. Not my Harry. That was it. That was the fragment. He came back to the room with his eyes wet and did not particularly try to hide it because there was no point. He sat with it for a moment, the smallness of those 3 words, the way they carried everything. She fought it, he said. Yes, said McGonagall, from the door, and her voice had completely abandoned its professional architecture. She sounded old and sorry and certain. She fought everything that ever came for you, Potter. Everything. Harry wiped his face. Looked at the ceiling. Okay, he said. Dumbledore found him that afternoon. Harry had been expecting it. He was walking back from the Ollery, he'd sent a short letter to Amelia Bones about the memory with his father, documenting it while it was fresh, and he took the long route back to the castle through the grounds, partly because the cold air was useful and partly because he'd noticed that Dumbledore tended to create circumstances for conversations rather than simply asking for them. And if the conversation was going to happen, Harry would rather have it outside where the sky was large and the walls weren't close. The headmaster appeared on the path near the greenhouses, walking in the opposite direction, with the elaborate casualness of a man who had absolutely been waiting. Harry, he said, as if surprised. A walk on a brisk day. Excellent idea. Afternoon, Professor, Harry said. He kept walking. Dumbledore fell into step beside him. I understand you've had quite a Saturday, Dumbledore said. Gentle. Warm. Memory recovery work is demanding. How are you feeling? Fine, Harry said. I've been hoping we might find a moment to speak, Dumbledore said. Things have been rather busy, and I'm afraid the beginning of term has not offered the quiet conversation I'd hoped to. I remember the argument, Harry said. Silence. They walked 3 paces before Dumbledore said, I beg your pardon? The argument with my father. In his study. I was 4, I was in the corner, and he was at the window telling you that if you were wrong about any of it he'd go to the Wizengamot. Harry looked at the grounds ahead, at the grey lake in the distance and the dark edge of the forest. He made you promise it was temporary. You promised. The path crunched under their feet. The castle loomed above them. Your father, Dumbledore said, and his voice was doing the thing, the warm, sorrowful, deeply sincere thing that Harry had been carefully not letting work on him, was a brave and loving man who wanted only the best for you. Every decision made in those years was made out of, was it temporary? Harry said. A pause. Harry. The situation is, considerably more complex than, was it temporary? Harry said again. Same tone. Same steadiness. Not aggressive. Not pleading. Just, requiring an answer. Dumbledore stopped walking. Harry stopped too, and turned to look at him. The old man's face was doing something complicated, not the twinkle now, nothing performative. Just the face of someone who has been asked a question they've been avoiding for a decade and has run out of corridor. It was intended to be, Dumbledore said. And then my parents died and the intention wasn't enough, Harry said. I believed, Dumbledore said, carefully, that the threat remained. That Voldemort's influence, while diminished, was not gone. That removing the blocks prematurely, without the proper circumstances in place, would expose you to dangers that, you were making decisions about my mind, Harry said. After the people who consented on my behalf were dead. You were the only one left who knew, and you kept deciding. He looked at Dumbledore directly, and Dumbledore met his gaze, and there was something in the old man's eyes that wasn't manipulation and wasn't performance, something that was genuinely, painfully sorry, genuine enough that Harry believed it and was unmoved by it simultaneously. You love me, Harry said. I think you actually do. I think this is the version of love that looks like control and calls itself protection, and I think you've believed every word of it your whole life, and I think my parents paid for that belief with my childhood. Dumbledore said nothing. The wind moved across the grounds between them. I'm not asking you to leave the school, Harry said. I'm not asking Bones to arrest you, though that's her call, not mine. I'm telling you that I understand what happened, and I'm telling you that I'm going to recover every one of those 72 blocks, and I'm going to know my own history completely, and there is nothing you can do about that now that is worse than what's already been done. He paused. And I'm telling you that if you try to interfere with the investigation, or with Clearwater's work, or with anything Amelia Bones is doing, I will find out, and I will not be quiet about it. The wind died. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time with an expression that Harry couldn't fully name, grief and pride and the specific sorrow of someone recognizing themselves in a mirror they didn't expect. You are, Dumbledore said softly, extraordinarily like your father. Good, Harry said. And he meant it completely. Good afternoon, Professor. He walked back to the castle. Behind him he heard Dumbledore stand on the path for a long time before his footsteps finally turned and went a different way. The common room was warm and full of noise when Harry got back. Someone had started a gobstones tournament near the fire and it had devolved into cheerful chaos. Fred and George were performing what appeared to be a spontaneous magic act involving a hat and a series of increasingly bewildered creatures. The smell of something toasted drifted from the direction of the fireplace. Ron was in his usual chair with his transfiguration homework mostly done, 3/4 of the way there, Quill abandoned, and Hermione was across from him looking torn between finishing her own perfect work and the obvious need to know what had happened today. Harry dropped into the chair between them. He told them. All of it, the session, the memories, his father's argument, the fragment of his mother's voice, and the conversation on the grounds. When he finished, Ron said nothing for a moment. His ears were doing the red thing. His jaw was tight in a way that Harry was learning meant Ron Weasley was furious and trying to decide what to do with it. Your dad argued, Ron said finally. He actually fought back. Yeah. And Dumbledore promised and then just, didn't. Yeah. Ron looked at his homework. Looked at the fire. My mum's going to write 17 more letters, he said. Harry laughed. It came out more fully than he'd expected, warm and real. Hermione had been quieter than usual during the telling, and she'd been turning a quill over and over in her fingers, which Harry had started to recognize as her thinking gesture. Now she said, the prophecy. Dumbledore mentioned a prophecy to your father. Yeah. He said it was about Voldemort discovering your abilities. That the prophecy was specific. She set down the quill. We don't know what it says. No, Harry agreed. That seems important. She looked at him with the focused intelligence that was becoming familiar and comfortable, the look of someone working alongside you rather than at you. If the blocks and the suppression and the Dursleys and all of it was built around a prophecy, then the prophecy is the foundation of everything. If we understand it, we understand the why. Bones will find it, Harry said. When she gets into the archive. Maybe. Hermione picked up the quill again. But prophecies are Department of Mysteries property. Bones might not be able to compel access. One problem at a time, Harry said. She accepted that. Then, more quietly, how are you? Really? He thought about it. About his father at the window. About 3 words in his mother's voice. About Dumbledore's face on the path, genuinely sorry, genuinely convinced he'd been right, both things at once. I keep recovering pieces of people I never got to know, he said. And they're not the people I was told about. They're more. He looked at the fire. That's not bad. It's actually something. It's more than I had yesterday. Hermione nodded, carefully, like she was handling the weight of that appropriately. Next Saturday, Ron said. For more blocks? For more blocks, Harry confirmed. Right. Ron picked up his quill with visible resolution. I'm going to finish this transfiguration essay and then I'm going to help you prepare. What do we need to know? Everything, Harry said, for the second time in a week, and this time Hermione was already reaching for 3 books simultaneously and didn't need to be told twice. Sunday morning brought 2 things. The first was a letter from Arthur Weasley, brief and precise. The Wisengamot hearing is confirmed for Tuesday. Amelia moves fast when she's decided something. The archive will be opened. I'll write when I know more. The second was that Harry, walking to breakfast alone because Ron was a slow riser and Hermione had been in the library since before dawn, passed Quirrell in the corridor outside the Great Hall. He'd had Quirrell for defense against the dark arts on Friday and had found the class, politely, internally, somewhat underwhelming. Quirrell was nervous in a way that felt wrong for a defense teacher, the specific nervousness not of someone shy or uncertain but of someone maintaining a performance and finding it taxing. His stutter came and went inconsistently. His eyes moved too much. Harry had noted all of this and filed it away. Now, in the corridor, Quirrell stopped and turned, and for just a moment, just a half-second before the performance reasserted itself, Harry saw something in his eyes that was not Quirrell at all. Not Quirrell. Something that knew Harry. Something that recognized him with the specific quality of an old enemy recognizing an old enemy. Then it was gone, and Quirrell was stuttering a good morning and adjusting his turban and hurrying away, and Harry stood in the corridor and watched him go. He'd been expecting something like this. Amelia Bones's perimeter Aurors, the ongoing investigation, the careful political maneuvering, all of it was necessary and good and none of it addressed the thing in the school that was going to be the most immediately dangerous. He thought about the memory of his father saying the Fidelius, the blood wards, all of it, it layers. He thought about his magic, for blocks lighter now and finding new exits. He thought about what Voldemort in Quirrell's turban had felt when it looked at him, the recognition, the calculation, and underneath both of those, so brief he almost missed it, something that was not quite fear but was its close neighbor. He thought, good. He went to breakfast. Tuesday afternoon, between charms and herbology, Harry was sitting on the steps outside the castle with his charms notes and a quiet 20 minutes, when Susan Bones found him. She sat down without asking, which he'd come to expect. She had a directness about her that reminded him, slightly, of her aunt. Mum won the hearing, she said. Harry looked up. The archive, she said. The Wisengamot granted dual authorization this morning. Fudge signed it himself, apparently he wanted it on record that he'd cooperated fully. A brief, dry expression that was entirely her aunt in miniature. They've sent in a ministry records team. We'll know what's in it by end of week. Harry let that settle. Your aunt moves fast, he said. She decided, Susan said. That's all it takes with her. She looked at him sideways. Are you ready for what might be in it? No, Harry said honestly. But that's fine. She nodded, accepting that. She wanted me to tell you something else. A pause. The Aurors on the perimeter have been watching Quirrell. Harry was very still. He had an unauthorized absence last Tuesday night. He left the castle at 2 in the morning and was on the grounds for 40 minutes. He claimed to be sleepwalking when Filch found him. Filch believed it. The Aurors did not. She looked at him steadily. She's pulling in a specialist. Someone who knows dark artifacts and possession indicators. Tell her the eyes, Harry said. She should look at his eyes. The turban as well. Susan looked at him. You've seen it. Briefly. He thought about that half-second in the corridor. Whatever's behind the stutter, it knows me. It's been aware of me since September 1st. He picked up his charm's notes. Tell her it's not going to wait for us to be ready. Whatever it's doing at Hogwarts, it's going to try to do it this year. The timeline on it feels urgent. Susan pulled out her own small notebook, very like her aunt's, and wrote that down without commenting on how an 11-year-old had assessed the urgency of a dark presence with any apparent accuracy. She just wrote it down and trusted it. Which, Harry was starting to understand, was the Bones family in practice. The archive by end of week, he said. Clearwater on Saturday. Bones's specialist on Quirrell. He looked out at the grounds, at the grey autumn sky, at the forest's dark edge. A lot of things moving at once. Yes, Susan agreed. Good, Harry said. He stood up, collected his notes, and looked down at her. Tell your aunt she's doing something important. I know she knows that. But tell her anyway. Susan looked up at him with an expression that was trying to stay businesslike and softening despite itself. I will, she said. He headed to herbology, and behind him the autumn wind moved through the castle grounds in something that was almost like purpose, and in the DMLE offices in London a records team opened a sealed subarchive for the first time in over a decade, and pulled out a folder thick with letters, and began to read. Chapter 4, The weight of the unblocked. The archive contents arrived on Friday. Not the originals, those stayed in ministry custody under seal, but Amelia Bones had copies made and delivered to Hogwarts by hand, carried by Shacklebolt himself, who arrived at the castle at 7 in the morning before classes and went directly to McGonagall's office. Harry got the summons at breakfast, a curt note in McGonagall's handwriting that said simply, "My office. Now. Bring no one." He told Ron and Hermione where he was going. Ron nodded and looked focused. Hermione opened her mouth to say something about the importance of documentation and then closed it again, which meant she'd decided support was more important than advice. Harry appreciated both the instinct and the restraint. McGonagall's office was small and precise, full of tartan and ticking clocks and the specific ordered energy of a woman who managed chaos professionally and refused to let it follow her home. Shacklebolt was standing near the fireplace. Bones was at the desk, and beside her was a stack of copied parchments so thick it had its own gravitational field. Sit down, Bones said. Harry sat. I'm going to give you the overview first, she said, and then you can read the specific documents. Some of them are, I want you to have the shape of it before you're in the middle of individual letters. She looked at him steadily. Are you ready? Yes, he said. She opened the top folder. The archive contained, she said, 4 categories of material. The first was communications between Dumbledore and Croaker beginning in late 1980, before Harry was born, discussing the theoretical feasibility of what Croaker called developmental suppression architecture, the design of a layered obliviation system that could be applied to a growing magical child without causing permanent neurological damage. The correspondence was academic in tone, careful, exploratory. It read like 2 scholars discussing a problem. It also read, Harry thought when she showed him the first page, like 2 men who had decided on the answer before examining the question. The second category was communications between Dumbledore and James and Lily Potter, beginning shortly after Harry's birth. These were, her voice changed very slightly, more difficult. James Potter's letters were what Harry expected given the memory he'd recovered, fierce, resistant, full of a father-specific fury at being asked to participate in something that required his son to be diminished. He'd agreed eventually, but his agreement had conditions, and he'd written them all down with the precision of a man who understood that verbal promises could be forgotten or reinterpreted and was determined to have a paper record. Every condition was there. The temporary nature of the arrangement. The promise of full restoration. The specific circumstances under which restoration would occur. The commitment that Harry would be placed with loving, magical guardians if James and Lily could not themselves complete the restoration. That last condition, underlined twice in James's handwriting. Loving, magical guardians. Harry looked at that for a moment. He wrote it twice, Harry said. He underlined it twice, McGonagall said, from her chair near the wall. Her voice was doing the stripped, real thing it had been doing since Saturday. He was very specific. And Dumbledore agreed to all of it, Harry said. In writing, Bones confirmed. Lily Potter's letters were fewer and shorter and considerably harder to read. Not because of their content, they contained no arguments, no conditions, no negotiated terms. They were short because Lily Potter, apparently, had said everything she intended to say in person and put in writing only what she felt required documentation. But what she had written was precise. Clinical in a way that was clearly not her natural register, the careful language of someone who has made a decision that cost them something significant and is not interested in being poetic about it. She had noted, in one letter dated when Harry was 2, that the most recent session with Croaker had been harder than expected. That Harry had been ill afterward for 3 days. That she did not believe the illness was unrelated to the procedure. That she expected Dumbledore to discuss this with Croaker and that she expected modifications. Modifications had been made. She'd noted that in the next letter. Brief acknowledgement. Moving on. And in the last letter Lily Potter had ever written, dated 6 weeks before Halloween 1981, a single line at the bottom of an otherwise routine update: if something happens to us, Albus, please remember what James made you promise. He'll need it someday. He'll need all of it. Harry sat with that for a while. The room let him. Then he said, "What's in the third category?" The third category was operational. Records of each obliviation session, dates, location, which memories were targeted, which caster performed the removal, notes on Harry's condition afterward. 72 entries, clinical and complete, spanning from when he was 18 months old to when he was 10. The final entry, dated 3 months before his 11th birthday, noted that his Hogwarts letter would arrive shortly and that the blocks were stable and the core suppression was holding and that they would assess the restoration question upon the boy's arrival at school. Assess the restoration question. He was going to do it, Harry said. At some point this year. That was always the plan. Possibly, Bones said. But he hadn't done it yet, Harry said. By September 1st, he hadn't arranged anything. No healer scheduled. No plan in place. He thought about that. Why? That, Bones said, is one of several questions I intend to put to him directly. Under oath. In front of the Wisengamot. Harry looked at her. Is that happening? I've formally requested a hearing, she said. Given the archive evidence, I have sufficient grounds. The unauthorized maintenance of suppression procedures on a minor beyond the agreed term. The failure to honor written commitments. The unauthorized placement with Muggle guardians in violation of the stated conditions. She said each item the way you set down heavy objects, deliberately, one at a time. The question of whether criminal charges follow depends on what he says and what the Wisengamot decides. That's not my decision. Dumbledore before the Wisengamot, McGonagall said softly, to no one in particular. What's the fourth category? Harry asked. A pause. The fourth category, Bones said carefully, is correspondence between Dumbledore and the Department of Mysteries regarding a specific piece of classified information. I can tell you that it exists. I cannot tell you its contents. That material is classified at a level that my authorization doesn't fully cover. She met his eyes. What I can tell you is that it's directly relevant to you. To why all of this was done. And I'm working on accessing it. The prophecy, Harry thought. Okay, he said. He looked at the stack of copied parchments. Can I keep these? The copies are yours, she said. I'd recommend not leaving them in Gryffindor Tower. He looked at her. Somewhere more secure, she said. He thought about the castle, its thousand-year density of hidden spaces and forgotten rooms, its habit of opening things to people who needed them. I'll manage it, he said. He read for 2 hours that evening in a small room that he'd found on the 7th floor, a room that hadn't been there the first 6 times he'd walked that corridor but had appeared when he needed it, warm and lamplit with a comfortable chair and a door that locked in a way that felt fundamental. He read all of it, every letter, every clinical record, every dated entry, and when he was done he sat for a while and organized what he knew. His parents had loved him. That was not in question. His father had fought and his mother had endured, and both of them had believed they were protecting him, and both of them had been wrong in a way that wasn't stupid or negligent but was the specific wrongness of people who had trusted too much in a man who was very good at being trusted. Dumbledore had believed he was right. That was also not in question. The letters read like a man who had genuine conviction, not the sneaking conviction of someone who knows they're doing harm and is justifying it, but the settled, sorrowful conviction of someone who believes they are the only one who can see the full picture and is bearing the weight of that vision alone. Which was, Harry thought, exactly the problem. No one should be the only one who can see the full picture. That's how you get things catastrophically wrong with complete sincerity. The Dursleys were a separate category of wrong. Not Dumbledore's conviction, his failure. The loving, magical guardians that James had required. The explicit written commitment. Dumbledore had looked at that promise and placed Harry with Petunia Dursley anyway, and the only justification in the archive was a single line in an internal memo from Dumbledore to himself, not even a letter, a memo to himself, that said, the blood ward protection supersedes secondary placement conditions. Long-term security must take precedence. Harry folded that particular copy very precisely and put it at the bottom of the stack. He could feel his anger. It was there, clear and specific, like a flame in a steady draft. Not wild. Not consuming. Just present. He'd made peace with the fact that anger was allowed. His father had been angry. His mother had endured. Both were legitimate responses to an illegitimate situation, and neither prevented you from thinking clearly or moving forward. He put the copies in the room's single drawer, which locked with a word, apparently, a word the room had suggested to him by the simple mechanism of being a room that existed when needed, and went to dinner. Saturday's session was different from the start. Clearwater arrived with a different energy, not lighter exactly, but more purposeful, the specific purpose of someone who has spent a week preparing and is ready. She'd reviewed the archive copies that Bones had shared with her, and she'd used the week to map the remaining blocks against the session records. I know what's in each one, she told Harry, before they started. Broadly. I can tell you before I open each block what period of your life it's from and approximately how significant the memory content is likely to be. I'm going to give you that information so that you can choose the order. Harry looked at the list she'd prepared. 12 items. She was planning to do more today, she said, because his core was responding well and the recent blocks had come down cleanly. 12 more removed this session would take the total past the halfway mark. He read the list. Ages and approximate content, early childhood sensory memories, developmental skills, specific events. One entry near the bottom was flagged, age 3 to 4. High magical content. Significant power demonstration. Likely the origin event. That one, Harry said, pointing. That's the most heavily suppressed block on the list, Clearwater said. I'd recommend working up to it, a few lighter ones first, to loosen the surrounding architecture. However you need to approach it technically, Harry said, do that. But I want that one today. She looked at him for a moment and then nodded, and the session began. The first 3 blocks were what she'd promised, sensory and light, fragments of early childhood that arrived like photographs developing in real time. His parents in a garden, summer, the smell of something specific and sweet. His mother reading to him, a story he couldn't catch the words of but could feel the rhythm of. His father on a broomstick, low, barely off the ground, and Harry on his lap with tiny hands on the handle, and the feeling of it, the exact sensation of a broomstick under him, vibrating with contained speed, he came back from that one breathing faster. Broomstick, he told Ron and Hermione later, and watched Ron's face do something that was almost religious awe. The 4th through 8th blocks came in a controlled progression, each one a little deeper, a little older, and with each one something physical was happening in the room that Clearwater noted in her professional log with the deliberate understatement of a woman who had spent 31 years developing the ability to record extraordinary things in ordinary language. The candles burned higher. The air pressure changed in measurable ways. Prakash's instruments had been reinforced after last Saturday and they held, but they held at their limits. Harry's magic was finding the exits faster now. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't lightning or shouting or things flying across the room without intention. It was subtler than that, a quality of the air around him, like the difference between a room with a single candle and the same room fully lit. Not blinding. Just, more present. More real. He'd walk into a space and the space would respond to him the way spaces respond to weather, a shift in the quality of attention, a recognition. He didn't try to contain it. There was nothing to contain. It was just him. Then Clearwater reached the flagged block. "Ready?" she said. "Do it," Harry said. The pressure when she found it was different from all the others, not more intense but more complex, layered in a way that made the scanning sensation feel like it was moving through something dense and multidimensional rather than straight. She worked for nearly 5 minutes just locating the binding points before she began the dissolution, and when she began it was slow, deliberate, with the focused precision of someone diffusing something rather than simply unlocking it. And then it opened. Harry was 3 years old and in a room he'd been in many times before. The James and Lily house, the specific quality of light through specific windows, the organized clutter of people who lived fully and thought that was more important than tidiness. He was in the sitting room and he was alone, which was unusual, and he was bored, which was not. He had been given a set of building blocks, wooden, brightly colored, and he had been told to play with them while the adults talked in the kitchen. He could hear them. He could hear Dumbledore's voice and his father's voice and his mother's voice, and he did not understand the words but he understood the tension in them, the way you understand weather before it arrives. He looked at the building blocks. He had not yet put a single one on top of another. He reached out his hand and the blocks moved. All of them, simultaneously, rising from the floor in smooth arcs and arranging themselves into a structure, not random, not a simple tower, a complex interlocking architecture, a dozen blocks fitting together in a configuration that a structural engineer would have required a ruler to produce. Harry looked at it. He reached out again. The structure changed. Became a different configuration, equally precise. He pulled his hand back and reached again and the blocks became a sphere, a perfect sphere, all 12 blocks fitting together to form a round shape that should have been geometrically impossible with rectangular pieces and wasn't. He was 3 years old and he was very pleased with the sphere. Then his mother appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, looking at the sphere of impossibly arranged building blocks floating at her 3-year-old son's eye level, and her expression was, he hadn't had the language for it at 3, but he had it now. It was the expression of someone who sees something beautiful and is simultaneously terrified of it. She said his name. He turned to look at her and the sphere held its position, perfectly stable, while he was looking elsewhere. She crossed the room and crouched beside him and held his face in her hands and looked at him for a long time. And he could see her thinking, could see the adult decision happening behind her eyes while he waited, 3 years old and patient and not afraid of anything. She kissed his forehead and said, quietly and completely, "You are extraordinary. You understand? Don't you ever let anyone tell you you're not." Then she stood up. Called for Croaker. And turned away. Harry came back to the room and the instruments were all at maximum again and the door had blown open and in the corridor McGonagall was gripping the doorframe with both hands like she needed something to hold on to. He was sitting perfectly still. The air around him was doing something that wasn't describable as a specific effect, it was more like a quality. Like standing near a transformer station, a sense of enormous energy moving through something designed to hold it. Except the thing designed to hold it was Harry, and it was holding. He looked at his hands. They were calm. Steady. He turned them over and looked at his palms and thought about a 3-year-old making a sphere out of building blocks, and his mother's face, and "You are extraordinary," and the decision she'd made immediately after. She had believed it was for his protection. She had said the true thing to him first, had wanted it in him somewhere even if she was about to lock it away, and then she'd turned away and made the choice she felt she had no alternative to. He understood that. The grief and the understanding sat alongside each other, not canceling each other out, just coexisting in the complicated way that true things about people you love always do. "Harry," Clearwater said carefully. She was watching him with professional attention and something that wasn't professional underneath it. "I know," he said. "I'm fine." "Your magical output right now," Prakash said from across the room, his voice entirely level, "is registering at a level that our instruments were not designed to measure." "I'll be more careful," Harry said. "I'm not," Prakash glanced at his instruments. "I'm not saying you need to be. I'm reporting data." Harry looked at him. "You're not frightened," Harry said. "I've worked with Healer Clearwater for 6 years," Prakash said. "I've seen some things." He looked at his instruments again. "But no. No, I'm not frightened." A pause. "I'm impressed." Harry looked at the empty space in the room where 12 building blocks had been arranged into a sphere 30-some years ago, and thought about what it meant that the memory of doing it had come back like muscle memory, like his hands already knew how. The Quidditch situation arrived 3 days later and was not something Harry had engineered. Oliver Wood had spotted him at breakfast, come to the conclusion that someone who could feel a broomstick the way Harry clearly could needed to be on the team, and had booked the pitch for a Tuesday afternoon trial in the way that Oliver would book things, without asking permission, simply by informing McGonagall that it was happening and trusting that her fondness for competitive victory would override her administrative objections. It did. Harry went to the pitch with no particular investment in the outcome and came away as Gryffindor's new seeker. This was less because of any exceptional performance during the trial, though the trial was fine. He was comfortable on a broom with a comfort that was cellular rather than learned, and more because of something that happened midway through it. Wood had thrown the practice snitch to give Harry a sense of the tracking, and it had disappeared into the grey autumn air, and Harry had tracked it not by sight but by something else, a kind of awareness, spatial and specific, that told him exactly where it was before he saw it, and he'd gone straight to it, no searching, no spiraling, straight line, hand out, done. Wood had stared. "How did you do that?" he'd said. "I don't know exactly," Harry said, which was true. He had some theories. "Can you do it again?" "Yes," Harry said. He did it 4 more times with the same directness, and Wood's expression progressed through disbelief and wonder and landed firmly in the territory of fierce competitive satisfaction. "Where have you been all my life?" Wood said. "Surrey," Harry said. He told Hermione and Ron at dinner. Ron's reaction was uncomplicated joy. He pumped his fist twice and immediately began discussing strategy with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had grown up breathing Quidditch. Hermione's reaction was slightly more analytical. "The spatial awareness," she said, pulling her notebook out. "The tracking. That's not a standard first-year skill. That's not really a standard any-year skill." She looked at him. "Is this from the blocks?" "Probably," Harry said. "The core finding equilibrium. The awareness is, it's not limited to Quidditch." He thought about how to say it. "It's everything. I can feel where things are. People, objects. The castle, a bit, which is the strangest one." He paused. "I walked past the corridor where Quirrell's classroom is this morning and I could feel him before I got there. Not a general sense. Specific. Like 2 signals." Hermione's pen stopped. Two signals. Two distinct magical presences. One his, one different. He said it matter-of-factly. I think it's getting clearer as the blocks come down. You can feel Voldemort, Ron said, his voice carefully even. I think I could always feel something wrong, Harry said. I just didn't have the language for it. Now I do. He looked at his dinner. Bones is specialist. Has Susan said anything about when they're going in? Thursday, Ron said. She told me at herbology. 2 Aurors and a specialist named Moody. Harry looked up. Alastor Moody? You know him? Bones mentioned him in her first letter. Said if it turned out to be a possession situation she'd call him. He thought about the half-second of not Quirrell in the corridor, the recognition in those eyes. Good. If there's anyone who can assess this without being fooled, it's probably him. How do you know anything about Alastor Moody? Hermione asked. I read, Harry said. She looked at him with a very specific expression that meant she was filing this away. Thursday's potions class was the one that mattered. Harry had been patient with Snape. Not submissive, he'd made that clear on the first day, but patient, in the sense of not engaging with every provocation, not feeding the specific kind of conflict that Snape seemed to want, which was Harry proving himself difficult so that Snape could justify the difficulty of his treatment. Harry declined to be difficult. He did excellent work, he answered questions accurately when called upon, and he refused to perform either anxiety or resentment. This appeared to be more irritating to Snape than any of the alternatives would have been. But Thursday was the first practical session with real ingredients, and practical sessions had a different quality to them, because magic that was visible was harder to misinterpret or dismiss. Harry's potion, a simple boil cure, was ready 12 minutes before anyone else's, clear as water and precisely the right temperature, and he'd done it by feel as much as method, knowing when to stir and when to let it settle the way you know when music wants to change. Snape arrived at his station without being called. He looked at the potion. He looked at Harry. He picked up a testing spoon and sampled it, and his expression did something complicated, not pleasant, but not nothing. Acceptable, he said. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Snape set down the spoon. Your mother, he said, his voice dropping so that only Harry could hear it, was an exceptional potion student. He paused. One of the finest I have known. Harry looked at him. Snape's face was doing something it didn't do in public, something stripped and painful and present, the face of a person who is mentioning something that costs them something to mention. Harry understood, suddenly, that this was the most genuine thing Snape had said to him, possibly the most genuine thing Snape said to anyone, and that it was connected to grief so old it had become structural. She sounds like it, Harry said. And then, because honesty was the only thing that worked in moments that cost people something, tell me something about her. Something true. Not from a memory, something you know. Snape was very still. She laughed, Snape said, after a moment, at things that weren't funny to anyone else, because she saw something in them that wasn't obvious. It was infuriating. And remarkable. He paused. She would have been furious about the blocks. Not at your father, not even at Dumbledore, ultimately. At the waste. The waste of you. His voice was entirely controlled and entirely present. She would have found that unforgivable. Harry looked at him. Thank you, he said, and meant it completely. Snape turned away and did not speak to him again for the rest of class, but the quality of the silence between them had changed. Was less like weather and more like an agreement. Ron, 2 stations over, was watching with his mouth slightly open. Thursday evening. Harry was in the corridor outside the library, returning Hermione's second borrowed copy of Prentice, when he felt it. Not Quirrell this time. Something else. Something from below, from the direction of the 3rd floor, the specific section of the castle that had a locked door and a warning. He'd been aware of it before, the general wrongness of whatever was down there, the same way he was aware of Quirrell, a signal, distinct and directional. But this was stronger. More agitated. Like something that had been patient was becoming less patient. He stood in the corridor for a moment and paid attention to it. The three-headed dog, he knew it was there. Ron had told him what Hagrid had said, and he'd been doing his own quiet research in the library, was guarding something. Bones knew about it too, or suspected. She'd mentioned the third floor in passing in one of her Friday updates. The thing it was guarding was connected to whatever Quirrell was looking for, which was connected to whatever Dumbledore's full plan had been. He was building this picture methodically, from multiple directions. He did not go to the third floor. Not because he was afraid of what was there. But because going alone and unplanned was less useful than going when he had more information and better timing, and he'd learned the difference between readiness and impulsiveness in the Dursleys' house, where impulsiveness had consequences that patience avoided. He went back to Gryffindor Tower. The common room was in its usual Thursday evening state, relaxed, warm, the fire doing its best work. Fred and George had a new scheme involving a magical advertisement that kept changing its message in a way that was definitely against several school rules. Neville Longbottom was sitting in a corner looking at a herbology diagram with the focused intensity of someone who loves a subject and is afraid to admit it publicly. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione at their usual table and said, "The thing on the third floor. I think it's getting restless." Hermione looked up immediately. "You can feel it from here?" "Yes. That's 3 floors and a significant distance." "I know." He looked at his hands. "It's stronger than it was a week ago. All of it is stronger. The Quirrell signal, the third floor, the general awareness of things." He paused. "Is that alarming?" "No," Hermione said, with the precise conviction of someone who has thought about this. "It's information. You're more sensitive, not less controlled. Those are different things." "I know," Harry said. "I just wanted your read on it." She looked briefly pleased that he'd asked, in the way she looked when her judgment was treated as useful rather than excessive. "My read," she said, "is that you should tell Bones. The restlessness. The signal from the third floor. She needs to know the timeline may be shorter than expected." "Already written," Harry said. He patted his robe pocket. "I'll send it tomorrow morning." Ron had been listening to all of this with the expression of someone watching a chess game, engaged, tracking, occasionally ahead of the conversation. "What do you think it's guarding?" he asked. "The dog." "What's underneath it?" "Something Dumbledore put there at the start of term," Harry said. "Something connected to what Quirrell, to what Voldemort wants." He thought about the Department of Mysteries correspondence in the archive, the sealed fourth category, the prophecy that had started all of this. "Bones is working on the classified material. When she gets it, I think we'll know what it is." "And in the meantime?" Ron said. Harry looked at the fire. "In the meantime," he said, "I keep going to class and taking Clearwater's blocks off and paying attention. I've got 30-some blocks left and the things I'm getting back." He paused, thinking about the sphere of building blocks, his mother's face, his father at the window, the muscle memory of impossible geometry. "I've got things left to recover that I need. I can feel it." He looked at his hands again. "What I'm going to be when the last one comes down, I don't know exactly. But I know it's more than this." "You're already more than most people could manage," Ron said, without flattery or performance. Just observation, simple and direct, the way Ron said most true things. Harry looked at him. "Not quite yet," Harry said. "But getting there." Saturday. Clearwater arrived with her bag and her pale wand and a look of focused intent, and they sat down across from each other in the familiar room, and she did 8 blocks. 8. The most she'd done in a single session, pushing the previous limit with the confidence of someone who has been watching a patient's progress and trusts what she sees. Each block came away cleaner than the last, the architecture loosening in a cascade effect. As more were removed, those adjacent became easier, the way removing stones from a wall means those around the gap are no longer load-bearing. The memories were a mosaic. Learning to walk, the specific sensation of it, the huge proud accomplishment of balancing, his father's delighted face. His mother teaching him something with her hands in water, patterns in water that responded to instruction. A garden in summer, his father chasing a garden gnome with spectacular incompetence while his mother sat on the steps and laughed at things that weren't funny to anyone else. He held all of these things carefully. After the session, sitting in the corridor outside the room because he needed stone walls and open space rather than warmth, he thought about what he had now. What he'd recovered across 4 sessions. The total removed, beyond the first night's loosening, was 23 blocks out of 72. Less than a third. And already the change was not just magical but essential. The person he was now was recognizably more himself than the person who'd sat on the stool and heard the hat scream 3 weeks ago. He was curious about who he'd be at 72. Shacklebolt sat down beside him in the corridor. Not to report anything. Not to check on him officially. Just sat. They were quiet for a while. "You knew Moody was going to Quirrell's assessment," Harry said. "Yes," Shacklebolt said. "How did it go?" A pause. "The report goes to Bones first." "Of course," Harry said. "But you were there." Another pause, longer, while Shacklebolt apparently decided something. "Moody confirmed what you felt in the corridor," he said, carefully. "There is a secondary presence. The specialist term is parasitic magical attachment, rare, requires very specific dark conditions, and leaves a signature that's distinct from the host." He paused. Moody identified the signature. Harry waited. "He's seen it once before," Shacklebolt said. 14 years ago. The night of October 31st, 1981, Harry said. "Yes." Harry leaned his head back against the stone wall. "So Bones knows for certain," he said. "Bones knows for certain," Shacklebolt confirmed. "What she does about it is complicated. You can't arrest a parasitic attachment. You can't aura your way into someone else's turban. There are protocols for this kind of possession that require careful handling. She's planning," Harry said. "Always," Shacklebolt said, with something in his voice that was clearly fondness and was almost certainly not something he'd admit to. Harry looked at the corridor ceiling. Stone, ancient, the castle's bones. He could feel it, the castle's attention, more clearly than ever now, that low, vast, interested awareness. He'd stopped finding it strange. "Shacklebolt," he said. The thing on the 3rd floor. It's getting more agitated. Has been for about a week." He looked at the Auror. "Something's going to happen before the end of term. Whatever Voldemort came here for, he's going to try to get it." Shacklebolt turned his head slowly and looked at Harry with the full attention of a very experienced man taking information from a very unusual source. "Noted," he said. Not dismissively. With the weight of someone adding a fact to an existing calculation. "I want to be there when it happens," Harry said. "Harry, I'm not asking permission," Harry said. "I'm telling you, so that you're not surprised." He met Shacklebolt's eyes steadily. "I'm also not going to do anything stupid or solo. I'm not impulsive. But I am going to be there." He paused. "I think Voldemort expects to find an 11-year-old boy with suppressed magic and no understanding of what's happening. I'd like him to be wrong about that." Shacklebolt looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face was doing something that Harry couldn't fully decode, professional assessment layered over something more personal, the look of a man who has dealt with many things in his career and is revising several categories. "I'll tell Bones," Shacklebolt said. "Thank you," Harry said. He got up from the corridor floor and went to find his friends. Behind him, Shacklebolt remained seated against the wall and looked at the space Harry had occupied and thought about a lot of things at once in the careful way of someone building a new framework around new information. Down below, in his office, Dumbledore held a pensieve full of silver threads and looked into it, and thought about what he'd promised James Potter in a study that smelled of ink, and what the Wizengamot hearing date on his desk said, and what it meant that the hat had screamed. And on the third floor, behind a locked door, something with 3 heads paced in a tight circle, and underneath the trapdoor in the floor, something ancient and small and immensely desired sat in its hiding place, and waited. Chapter 5. The conspiracy runs deeper. The Wizengamot hearing was set for the second Friday of November. Harry knew about it the way he knew about most things now, through Susan, through Shacklebolt's careful partial disclosures, through Amelia Bones's Friday updates which had evolved from formal briefings into something closer to a working correspondence, the kind two people develop when they're thinking about the same problem from different angles and have decided trust is more efficient than caution. He didn't attend. He was 11, it was a school day, and Bones had been direct about it. His presence would complicate the proceedings in ways that served Dumbledore's narrative better than hers. Dumbledore's solicitor would immediately frame any Wizengamot involvement as Harry being used, manipulated, a child caught in an adult political conflict. Better for Harry to be visibly at Hogwarts, visibly in class, visibly unaffected, while Bones laid the legal architecture brick by brick without him in the room. He understood the logic. He agreed with it. He still found the day difficult to sit through. Hermione kept him occupied through it, not as a distraction strategy, which he'd have found patronizing, but with genuine work, pulling him into a research project she'd been developing on the side about the history of Wizengamot oversight and the specific precedents for hearings involving Hogwarts administrative decisions. She had 4 feet of parchment written by mid-morning and consulted Harry's opinion on 2 specific points of interpretation, which was the right way to handle him when he needed his brain occupied. Ron provided chocolate frogs at intervals throughout the day, offered no analysis of Harry's emotional state, and beat him at chess twice in the evening in a way that required Harry to actually concentrate. Which was, Harry thought, probably the better therapy of the two. The verdict arrived by owl at 9 that evening. Bones's handwriting, brisk and clean, the Wizengamot has formally censured Dumbledore's office for unauthorized maintenance of suppression procedures beyond the agreed term and for violation of written placement conditions. The censure carries no criminal sanction at this stage, insufficient evidence for criminal intent without testimony, which requires the archive's 4th section. Working on it. Dumbledore made a statement. I'm enclosing a copy. Read it. A.B. Harry unfolded the enclosed page. Dumbledore's statement was, characteristic. Measured, genuine, taking full responsibility for specific failures while contextualizing everything within a framework of protective necessity. He expressed profound regret for the suffering caused. He acknowledged that his judgment had been imperfect. He did not, at any point, acknowledge that anyone else had the right to make decisions he had made unilaterally, though he dressed this omission in enough sorrow that the Wizengamot had apparently found it more moving than infuriating. The statement ended with a single line that was either an apology or a manifesto or both. I have always acted in the belief that some sacrifices, made in time, prevent greater ones later. I recognize, now, that I had no right to determine whose sacrifice that would be. Harry read that line 3 times. He handed the letter to Hermione, who read it once and said, he still thinks he was essentially right. He's sorry about the execution. Yes, Harry said. That's going to be a problem. Yes, Harry said. But it's his problem, not mine. He thought about the hearing, about Bones laying her case carefully in that chamber, about Dumbledore's statement landing with the Wizengamot in its particular way. Did it do anything? The censure is public record, Hermione said. The Wizengamot's records are publicly accessible. Every newspaper in the country can print it. She looked at him. Has anyone from the press? Not yet. He picked up the letter again. Bones is managing that. She's holding the press until she has the 4th section. The prophecy, Hermione said. Stop guessing things before I tell you them, Ron said to her. He was only half serious. It's not guessing, it's deduction, it's prophecy, Harry said. Yes. I think so. He set the letter down. Whatever it says is the foundation. Dumbledore's decision to suppress me was built on it. His placement decision, his whole long-game strategy for the war, all of it rests on a specific piece of Department of Mysteries material that we don't have yet. He looked at the fire. When we have it, everything else becomes legible. And in the meantime, Ron said. In the meantime, Harry said, we have other things to look at. He pulled his chair to the table and spread out the research he'd been doing quietly for the past 2 weeks, away from the main investigation, working from the castle's library and the room on the 7th floor and his own growing instincts. Ron and Hermione leaned in. The thing on the 3rd floor, he said. I've been tracking references. Hagrid had a conversation with Dumbledore at the start of term about something being moved from Gringotts, Vault 713, emptied on July 31st, same day someone broke in and found it empty. He looked at Hermione. What breaks into Gringotts? Nothing supposed to, she said immediately. The security is, dragons, curses, enchantments on the vaults themselves. The goblins are, she stopped. Nothing gets through goblin security unless it was already removed. It was already removed, Harry confirmed. Moved here. 3rd floor. He let that sit. Gringotts Vault 713. That's a high-security personal storage vault. Old registration. Who registers vaults like that? Hermione's expression sharpened. Old families. Institutions. The ministry, sometimes, for sensitive, she stopped again. Or individuals. Specific individuals with long-standing accounts and enough standing to maintain high-security personal storage. Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. The name sat in the air between them. Ron blinked. The alchemist? The one who, he's actually real? Very, Hermione said faintly. She looked at Harry. You think it's the Philosopher's Stone? I think it's the Philosopher's Stone, Harry confirmed. Flamel makes it. Has made it, repeatedly, for centuries, it's how he's still alive. The stone produces the elixir of life. It also produces unlimited gold. He looked at the fire. And Voldemort needs a body. The room was very quiet. He doesn't have one, Harry said. He's a parasite in Quirrell's turban because he doesn't have a physical form. He needs one. The elixir of life is, it's not a resurrection potion. But for someone who already exists, even in a diminished form, it could be, sustaining. Strengthening. A bridge to something more stable. He paused. He needs the stone. He came here for the stone. Whatever trap or obstacle course Dumbledore set up on the 3rd floor is standing between Voldemort and the stone, and he's been working around it since September. How far has he gotten? Ron asked. I don't know. But the restlessness I've been feeling from the 3rd floor, it's increased in the last week. Something's been disturbed. Tested. He looked at Shacklebolt's most recent note, sitting at the edge of the table. Moody knows. He's down there every other night. Hermione was writing. She wrote for 30 seconds without stopping, then looked up. What do you need from us? I need you to find out everything about the obstacle course, Harry said. What's down there? How many layers? Who designed each one? He paused. Not to get through it ourselves. To understand the shape of the endgame. When Voldemort makes his move, I want to know exactly where he has to go and what he has to do to get there. How do we find that out? Ron asked. Harry looked at him. You're very good at chess. Ron blinked. Defensive configurations, Harry said. Multi-layered sequential obstacles. That's a chess problem, essentially. You think like the designer. What would you put between an intruder and something valuable? Ron sat up slightly. Something to sort from something else. Something to navigate. Something physical, something mental, something magical. In what order? Harry said. Ron started thinking. Harry could see it happening, the chess brain engaging, the instinctive sense of how a board is constructed. Hermione was already writing down categories. Harry sat back and watched his friends work and felt, in the place where the hat had first pushed the door open, something that was now considerably more than music through a crack. More like the whole door, finally, being moved. Clearwater came on Saturday. 6 blocks. Harry came out of the session with his eyes bright and his hair more chaotic than usual and the specific look of someone who has just finished a long-distance run, not exhausted, stripped down. Clean. The memories from these 6 were different from the earlier ones. Older, foundational, so far back that some of them weren't properly visual at all, just sensory impressions, the felt knowledge of a self before it had words for itself. What came with them was less memory than capacity. Skills that had been locked in the blocks alongside their context, returning not as recollections but as abilities. He noticed it first in the corridor outside the hospital wing. He was walking back toward Gryffindor Tower, Shacklebolt trailing at his usual quiet distance, and there was a torch bracket on the wall that had gone out, the candle guttered and cold. He looked at it as he passed. It lit. Not with his wand, he didn't touch his wand. He looked at it and it lit with the specific steady flame of something that had always been lit and had simply forgotten for a moment. Shacklebolt stopped walking and looked at the torch. Harry kept walking. I know, he said. I didn't say anything, Shacklebolt said. You were going to. I was going to say, Shacklebolt said, resuming his pace, that you should perhaps mention that to Clearwater. She knows, Harry said. She was expecting it. He paused. The wandless work. It's not new. I've been doing it since I was 3. The blocks just prevented it from happening consistently. He considered this. It's going to be more consistent now. How consistent? Shacklebolt asked, and his voice had exactly the neutral tone of a professional managing new information. Very, Harry said. Shacklebolt walked beside him for a moment. Bones needs to know. I'll write to her today, Harry said. You should also, Shacklebolt said, after another moment, be careful in classes. You're the second person to say that to me, Harry said. My answer is the same. I'm not going to hide what I am to make other people comfortable. I'm not asking you to hide it, Shacklebolt said. I'm asking you to be strategic. There's a difference. He glanced sideways. Bones is managing a political situation that requires you to be seen as a victim of institutional wrongdoing. If you start demonstrating power levels that make people nervous, the narrative shifts. Dumbledore's solicitor starts arguing that the suppression was necessary. That you're dangerous. That Dumbledore was protecting the public, not controlling a child. Harry thought about this carefully. It was a good point. It was a genuinely good point, and he appreciated Shacklebolt for making it directly rather than packaging it as concern. So what you're saying, Harry said slowly, is that there's a window. Before the full story is public, before all the blocks are removed, where I need to let Bones get her case into the open before I demonstrate what I'm capable of. A few weeks, Shacklebolt said. The 4th archive section. The prophecy material. Once that's public, once the full context is established, nothing you do can be weaponized against the narrative. Harry considered. I won't hide abilities that are relevant to safety, he said. The Quirrell situation, the 3rd floor, if something happens that requires me to act, I act. But in classes, in the common room, I can be discreet. That's all I'm asking, Shacklebolt said. All right, Harry said. And then, Because the dynamic between them had shifted over weeks of these corridor conversations into something that felt like mutual respect rather than adult supervision. For what it's worth, Shacklebolt, you're the best at this. The careful advice that isn't really advice. The information that isn't technically information. I have no idea what you're referring to, Shacklebolt said, entirely without expression. Of course not, Harry agreed. The owl from the Department of Mysteries arrived on Monday. It was not, Harry thought, a normal owl. Normal owls delivered mail with the particular variety of pigeon-brained indifference that made them useful. This one was black, large, and had the specific quality of purposeful intelligence that suggested it had been enchanted, or trained beyond conventional owl capacity, or was something else wearing an owl's shape. It dropped a sealed envelope on Harry's breakfast plate with neat precision and was gone before anyone at the Gryffindor table had properly registered its arrival. The envelope was sealed with a wax stamp that Harry didn't recognize, a circular design, layered, suggesting depth rather than surface. He broke it open. The letter inside was 3 lines. We know what the hat found. We have known since September. The 4th section of the archive is ours to release, not the DMLE's, but we have decided, after considerable internal discussion, that it should be released. An unspeakable will contact Bones today. The time for the prophecy to remain sealed has passed. No signature. Obviously. Harry read it twice, folded it, put it in his pocket, and looked at his breakfast. Ron had been watching from across the table. What was that? Department of Mysteries, Harry said. Ron stared. They wrote to you? Directly? Why would they? Because Croaker is one of theirs, Harry said. He performed 20 of my obliviations. They've been sitting with that knowledge since September, since the Hats report went to the DMLE and by extension to every relevant department. They've been, he thought about the phrase in the letter, having an internal discussion. He looked at Ron. I think there are people in the Department of Mysteries who are not comfortable with what Croaker did. And they've decided that the classified material, the prophecy, whatever else is in there, needs to come out. Why now? Ron asked. The Wisengamot censure, Harry said. It's public. The story is moving. If they don't release the context now, they'll be forced to release it later in worse circumstances. He picked up his fork. Eat breakfast. Ron looked at him. Eat breakfast, Harry said again, calmly. Bones will handle it from here. It's what she does. Bones moved with the speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opening. By Tuesday evening she had arranged for the Unspeakable's testimony to be provided to the Wisengamot under special session. By Wednesday morning she had successfully petitioned for press access to the hearing's outcome. By Thursday she had the prophecy in hand, officially declassified, admissible. She sent Harry a copy on Thursday afternoon. He read it alone in the room on the 7th floor, sitting in the comfortable chair by the lamp, and the room was very quiet. The prophecy was in the dry formal language of official transcription, stripped of the drama of its original delivery, and it said what it said with the specific clarity of something that had been interpreted many times and was still open to interpretation. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Harry read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at the lamp. Power the Dark Lord knows not. He thought about a 3-year-old making a sphere of building blocks. He thought about a torch lighting without a wand. He thought about the spatial awareness that tracked a snitch across a gray sky like a compass finding north. He thought about Clearwater's instruments going past their maximum and stopping. He thought about 72 blocks designed specifically to prevent this power from developing. Not because the power was dangerous to Harry. Because the power was what made the prophecy real. Because as long as Harry Potter could be kept small and ignorant and suppressed, Voldemort could be managed, neutralized, kept at bay without anyone having to actually confront the full weight of what the prophecy meant. Dumbledore's strategy, finally, completely legible. Keep Harry diminished until the moment was right, then restore him, then use him. Not cruelly, with genuine love, with every intention of giving him back what was his. But on Dumbledore's timeline. Under Dumbledore's control. Harry as the instrument of a plan that Harry had never consented to and had never been asked to understand. He folded the prophecy and held it and thought about something that wasn't anger, exactly, though anger was part of it. Something more complex. The feeling of understanding a system completely, seeing every gear and joint and point of failure, and knowing that understanding it meant you'd already stepped outside it. He was already outside it. Dumbledore's plan required Harry to be controllable. Harry was not going to be controllable. That wasn't defiance, it was just a fact about who Harry was when you removed the blocks designed to make him otherwise. He pulled out parchment and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Amelia Bones. I've read the prophecy. I want to discuss what it means for the investigation's next steps. Also, I think we're running short of time on the Quirrell situation. Can Moody be available this weekend? The second was short, and he sat with it for a while before writing it, because it required him to decide something that once decided couldn't be undecided. It was to Dumbledore. Professor, I've read the prophecy. I think it's time we spoke properly. Not managed. Not carefully. Properly. Tomorrow evening, your office, 7 o'clock. Harry Potter. He sent both letters with separate owls and sat in the quiet room for a while longer, and the lamp burned steadily, and the castle made its low foundational sound, and Harry thought about 72 and what he was becoming as the number dropped, and was not afraid of any part of it. Dumbledore's office was exactly what Harry had expected, an extraordinary amount of accumulated life in one circular space, instruments and portraits and the particular density of a very old man's very full existence. The portraits of former headmasters dozed or pretended to doze with the practiced disinterest of people who were in fact paying extremely close attention. Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch, and he looked at Harry when Harry came in with the direct, calm attention of something ancient that has seen a lot of things and decided this one was worth watching. Dumbledore was at his desk. He rose when Harry entered. Harry. Warm. Genuine. Carrying something that was not quite guilt and was not quite relief, some mixture of both, complicated by the fact that Dumbledore was capable of holding multiple emotional states simultaneously without any of them cancelling the others out. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me, Harry said, and sat down in the chair opposite the desk, and waited. Dumbledore sat. Looked at him across the desk. The twinkle was notably absent. What was there instead was, more interesting. Raw, slightly human in a way the performance usually smoothed over. You've read the prophecy, Dumbledore said. Yes. Then you understand why. I understand what you thought, Harry said. I want you to hear what I think. He leaned forward slightly. The prophecy says I have power the Dark Lord knows not. You interpreted that to mean that if he found out what I could do, he'd come for me harder and earlier than he otherwise would, so you suppressed the power. Kept me ignorant. Kept me controlled. He paused. What if you were wrong? Dumbledore was quiet. What if the power the Dark Lord knows not isn't something that can be hidden? Harry said. What if it's something that only exists fully when it's allowed to develop? When it's not blocked and suppressed and managed? What if your entire strategy produced the one outcome you were trying to prevent, me arriving at this confrontation less capable than I should be? The room was very still. Fawkes made a sound that was not quite a trill, something softer, lower, like an agreement. I have asked myself that question, Dumbledore said, and his voice was stripped of everything except honest. In recent weeks, more than before. The Hat's report, Clearwater's assessments, what Bones has presented to the Wisengamot, he paused. I see now that my confidence in my own judgment was excessive. It was, Harry agreed, without cruelty. You made yourself the only person who could see the full picture, and then you used that position to make decisions about other people's lives. My parents trusted you because you were the most capable person they knew, and they were terrified, and you used that trust to take something from them and from me that you had no right to take. Dumbledore's hands, folded on the desk, did not move. And I am sorry, Dumbledore said. I have said that, and I recognize it's insufficient. It's a start, Harry said. I'm not here to hear another apology. I'm here to ask you something specific. He looked at the headmaster directly. What is on the third floor? In full. Every layer. A pause. Harry, the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. I know that part. I want to know the obstacles. Who designed what? What the sequence is. He held Dumbledore's eyes. Because Voldemort is in this school and he's been working at whatever you've put down there for 3 months, and I think before the end of term he's going to make his serious attempt. And when that happens I intend to be there. You are a first-year student, Dumbledore said, gently. 11 years old, I'm the child the prophecy is about, Harry said. I'm the one with the power. I'm the one who's been working with your best Aurors for 2 months. I am also, and here his voice stayed level and clear and completely certain, the only person in this building who can feel exactly where Quirrell is at any given moment and can feel when the thing possessing him is stirring. That makes me relevant regardless of my age. Dumbledore looked at him. The look lasted a long time. Then, slowly, Dumbledore opened his desk drawer. He withdrew a piece of parchment and set it on the desk between them. A diagram. 7 layers, each labeled in different handwriting, different designers. Harry pulled it toward him and read. A 3-headed dog. Devil's snare. Enchanted keys. A life-size chess set. A troll. Poisons and logic. A mirror. He looked at the last one. A mirror? The mirror of Aurors, Dumbledore said. It shows the viewer their deepest desire. I designed it so that the stone is visible only to someone who wants it but does not wish to use it. Wants to have it, not to use it. He paused. In theory, Voldemort cannot retrieve it. He desires only to use it. Harry looked at the mirror entry for a long time. In theory, he said. Yes, Dumbledore said. He's not going to try to retrieve it himself, Harry said. He's possessing Quirrell. He's going to use Quirrell, whose desire may be different, may be complex enough to confuse the mirror's enchantment. He thought about Quirrell, the nervousness, the performance, the half-second of something other when he'd passed Harry in the corridor. What does Quirrell want? Dumbledore was very still. Approval, Harry said, thinking aloud. Recognition. He's been used as a vessel for something overwhelming and he's still in there somewhere, needing to have been useful. To have mattered. He looked at Dumbledore. If Quirrell believes that getting the stone will prove something to himself, the mirror might show it to him. Dumbledore's expression was the expression of someone who has encountered a chess move they hadn't seen coming. I will strengthen the protection, he said. You should tell Bones, Harry said. Tonight. All of this. She needs to know the full obstacle configuration and she needs to have Aurors positioned. He held Dumbledore's eyes. This is not your operation to run alone anymore. Is that understood? Another long look. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. It is understood. Harry stood up. Picked up the diagram and folded it. I'm keeping this, he said. Dumbledore looked at the space where the parchment had been. Of course, he said. Harry walked to the door. Stopped. The portrait of my parents, he said. You have one. In the lower corridor near the charms classroom, someone told me. I've felt it. He turned back. I'd like to speak to them. Dumbledore's face did something that was purely painful. Harry, Portraits are only an echo. They cannot. I know what portraits are, Harry said. I still want to speak to them. Can you arrange it? A long moment. I'll have the portrait moved to a location where you can have privacy, Dumbledore said. Tomorrow morning. Thank you, Harry said. He left. The portrait of James and Lily Potter was small and set in a warm-colored frame, and Dumbledore had placed it in the alcove off the first-floor corridor where nobody usually went, with a chair in front of it and a privacy charm on the entrance. Harry sat down in front of them on Saturday morning before Clearwater's session, and looked at his parents for the first time with his own eyes. They were, him, partly. His father was tallish and messy-haired with James Potter's specific quality of contained energy, the look of someone always mid-movement even when still. His mother was smaller, red-haired, and had eyes that were exactly his own, green and direct and already looking at him with an expression he hadn't been prepared for. The portrait looked at him. "Hello," said his mother's portrait, and her voice had the cadence of the voice in the fragment he'd recovered, the not my Harry voice, warm and specific and careful of him. "Hello," Harry said. He didn't know what he'd been expecting. Not this, not the sudden very full feeling in his chest, the weight of 10 years of distance collapsing in a corridor alcove on a Saturday morning. He sat with it. "We have known," his father's portrait said, James Potter's voice, lighter than he'd sounded in the memory, the argument voice replaced by something quieter, since Dumbledore showed us the report. What the hat found. The portrait James looked at him with the steady complicated pride of someone who is proud and sorry simultaneously. You've been doing brilliantly, by all accounts. 49 blocks removed so far," Harry said. "How do you feel?" his mother asked. "More," Harry said. "Every time, more." He looked at them both. "You did what you thought you had to. I know that. I've had the memories back, I know what the arguments looked like, what it cost you." He paused. "I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that." His mother's portrait closed its eyes for a moment, briefly. "The prophecy," his father said. "You've read it?" "Yes." "What Albus thought it meant," James started. "I know what he thought," Harry said. "I know what he did. And I know what I think it actually means." He looked at his father's face, the messy hair, the contained energy, the jaw. "You would have hated what happened," Harry said. "After the Dursleys. I would have burned the house down," James said, with the flat certainty of someone reporting a physical law. Harry laughed. It came out full and warm and surprised him. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I thought." They talked for an hour. Not about the investigation or Voldemort or the third floor, there would be time for implications and strategy. They talked about small things. His mother had opinions about potions pedagogy that were genuinely useful. His father had played Quidditch at exactly the same position Harry now played, which was not a surprise but was satisfying to hear. The portrait people were not his parents, he understood that, held it clearly, but they were made from his parents, from what the people who'd known them had preserved in enchanted paint, and that was something. When he left, he felt, not whole. Not all the way. There were 23 blocks still in place, the oldest and deepest ones. But more whole than before. He went to Clearwater's session. 6 more blocks. Coming out the other side of Saturday's session, Harry walked to dinner with the particular quality that had become his baseline, more present, more himself, the magic around him doing its constant low-level visible thing, and found Hermione and Ron at the Gryffindor table with their heads together over a piece of parchment. Hermione looked up when he sat down. "We figured out the sequence," she said. "The obstacle course. Ron worked it out from the chess angle and I cross-referenced with known enchantments and the professor's specialties. I talked to Dumbledore Thursday," Harry said. "He showed me the diagram." They both stopped. "You just," Ron said slowly, "went to Dumbledore and asked him." "Yes," Harry said. "And he just showed me," "Yes." Ron stared at him for a moment. Then he picked up his parchment, looked at it, and set it back down. Ours is more detailed, he said. Harry smiled. Show me. It was more detailed. Ron had been working on it with the chess brain engaged fully, and he'd correctly mapped 5 of the 7 layers including the logic puzzle sequence that he deduced from Professor Snape's teaching methodology. Hermione had added defensive analysis to each layer, the specific weaknesses, the likely timing of an intruder's progression. How long would someone take to get through all 7? Harry asked. Ron studied the board. Depends on the chess layer. That one is designed to slow. If someone smart is driving, an hour, maybe less. He looked up. Unless they have inside knowledge. Quirrell teaches defense, Hermione said quietly. He's been in this castle for months. He may have gotten further than we think. He has, Harry said. He felt it, the 3rd floor signal, the texture of it. He's past the dog. Has been for a while. He looked at his own copy of the diagram. The chess set is the one that'll hold him. He'll need to think through it, and thinking takes time. Which is when Bones's Aurors need to be ready, Ron said. Yes. Harry looked at them both. I need you to know, when this happens, it's not going to be us 3 going down there on some adventure. The Aurors will handle the intervention. I'm going to be present because I have specific capabilities that are relevant and because the prophecy makes this personally mine to participate in. But it's not a school thing. It's not sneaking around. We know that, Hermione said, with the firmness of someone who needs to be clear. We're not trying to be adventurers. We want to understand it so we can help you think. She paused. And so we can support you properly when it happens. Harry looked at them both. Ron was nodding, straightforward and committed. Hermione had her notebook out and was already annotating the layer analysis. He thought about a room on the 7th floor and a comfortable chair and not knowing any of this, and then he thought about now, this table, this warmth, these 2 people who had decided very early and very clearly that Harry Potter was worth knowing. Thank you, he said. He meant it as a general thing, larger than the moment. Ron passed him the serving dish. Eat something, he said. You look like you've just had 6 memory blocks removed. 7, actually, Harry said. 7, Ron corrected, entirely unfazed, and helped himself to potatoes. Sunday morning, before anyone was properly awake, Harry stood at the window of his dormitory and looked out at the grounds in the grey early light and felt the castle around him and below him and above him. Its old enormous attention settled on him with something that he'd begun to think of as fondness. He felt Quirrell in the corridor below. Felt the thing riding him, the dark presence that wore his face, always present now, always circling. He felt the 3rd floor signal, agitated, searching, urgent in the way it had been building for weeks. He felt something else. Something he hadn't felt before, or hadn't felt this clearly, a thread of awareness that ran from him toward Voldemort's presence and back, the strange connecting quality of the mark on his forehead that he'd had since he was a baby, the scar that had given him headaches he'd never understood until the hat explained them. Connection. The specific, strange, uncomfortable connection of 2 people the prophecy had locked together. Either must die at the hand of the other. He considered that quietly. He was not afraid of it. He'd examined it from every angle since reading the prophecy and found that what he felt was not fear but something more like clarity. The system is what it is. The pieces are on the board. His job was to understand the board completely and make the right moves. He pulled out his wand, maple, 10 inches, fairly whippy, with a core that Ollivander had described as unusual, and held it in his right hand. Then he set it on the windowsill. He raised his left hand, empty, and looked at the grounds below, at the dew on the grass and the black surface of the lake and the shadow of the forest, and he breathed, and he pushed. The dew on the grass moved. Every bead of it on the castle grounds, simultaneously, rippling outward in a perfect circle from the castle walls. Not dramatically, a subtle wave, a breath, like the grounds themselves exhaling. It spread to the edge of the forest and stopped. Harry looked at his hand. He picked up his wand and pocketed it and turned away from the window. 23 blocks left. He thought about what he'd be when they were all gone. He went down to breakfast. Chapter 6, The Hat Was Right. The end came on a Tuesday. Harry felt it before he woke up. The signal from the third floor had changed in the night, shifted from agitated to something that had a direction to it now, a vector. Not searching anymore. Moving. He sat up in the grey pre-dawn dark of his dormitory and knew with the clean certainty of someone reading a compass that Quirrell had made his move. He dressed without waking the others, moving quietly through the room, and then stopped at the door and reconsidered. Not because he needed backup. Because he'd told Ron and Hermione that this wasn't going to be a school adventure, and walking out alone in the dark would make a liar of him. He went back and shook Ron awake. Ron sat up immediately, which was unusual for someone who normally treated mornings as a personal insult. He looked at Harry's face and said, "Now." "Now," Harry said. Ron was up and reaching for his robes before Harry got to Hermione's dormitory door and knocked. She appeared in 11 seconds, fully dressed, with her notebook already in hand. "I heard you on the stairs," she said. "Go." They went. Harry had already sent his owl to Bones the previous night, a standing instruction, agreed after the Dumbledore meeting, that said simply, "When it moves, I'll send a signal." 3 taps on the enchanted paper. The enchanted paper was a two-way communication parchment that Shacklebolt had given him in the second week, and Harry had tapped it 3 times before leaving his dormitory. He didn't know how fast the Aurors could mobilize. He was going to assume fast and hope faster. The castle at this hour was still and attentive, its torches burning low and amber in the corridors, the portraits heavy-lidded and watching. Harry moved through it with the castle's specific cooperation, staircases settling under his feet without shifting, corridors opening outward, the general sense of a building that understood urgency and was facilitating. "He's already past the dog," Harry said quietly, as they moved up toward the 3rd floor. "Has been for a while. I can feel the trace of where he went. It's like, he searched for the right word. Warm air from an open oven. You can tell where someone went by what they disturbed." "What floor is he on now?" Hermione asked. "Below," Harry said. "He's through most of it. He's at the chess." "That'll hold him," Ron said. The chess brain had been engaged since he woke. Harry could see it, Ron's specific quality of focus, the particular look of someone doing calculations. No one gets through a life-size magical chess set quickly. It's a whole board. You have to think. He paused. Unless he's not playing to win. Unless he's playing to sacrifice his way through. Would that work? Harry said. If you're willing to lose pieces, yeah. Faster. Uglier. Ron's jaw set. I need to see the board. Harry looked at him. Ron, I need to see the board, Ron said again, steadily. I'm not being an idiot. I'm being useful. You feel where he is and you know what's happening. I see chess boards. That's the division of labor here. Harry thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Okay, he said. They reached the 3rd floor corridor. The door stood open, not forced, not broken. Opened carefully, someone who'd found the right approach, taken their time. Inside, the 3-headed dog was deeply asleep, snoring in a way that vibrated the floor, one enormous paw resting over the open trapdoor. The music from a small harp on the floor was still playing, thin and persistent, just enough to keep the dog under. Ron looked at the harp. We need it to keep playing, he said. Hermione was already moving. She found the harp's enchantment, ran her fingers along the frame with the focused precision of someone who had read about self-playing enchantments twice this term, and redirected it. The harp kept playing. The dog kept sleeping. They went through the trapdoor. The devil's snare was dead, recently burned, patches of it still smoking faintly where Quirrell had cleared the passage. Harry moved through the scorched remains without stopping, Hermione pulling Ron along before he could examine the plant more closely. The key room was a chaos of beating wings, hundreds of keys whirling at the ceiling, and the broomstick Quirrell had used was on the floor with a cracked handle. He'd caught the key but not cleanly. Harry didn't use a broomstick. He looked up, tracking, and the right key came to him the way the snitch came to him, direct and certain, and dropped into his palm. Hermione made a sound. "Not the time," Harry said, and unlocked the door. The chess room was vast and cold and lit by its own uncertain light, the pieces enormous and ancient and motionless because Quirrell was not here yet. He'd been here, Harry could feel the disturbance, the trace, but the board was untouched. He hadn't started the chess yet. He was at the troll already, Harry realized, adjusting his reading of the signal. Ron stepped onto the board and looked. He stood there for 30 seconds, completely still, doing what Ron Weasley did with boards. Then, "We need to get across fast and without sacrificing anything. If Quirrell comes back through and the pieces have moved, he'll know someone else is in play." "Can you do that?" Harry asked. "No," Ron said. "Not without moving anything at all. But I can get us across in under 3 minutes without losing a person." He looked at Hermione, then at Harry. "Stay with me, move when I say, don't improvise." "Understood," Harry said. They crossed the board in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Ron was precise and decisive in the particular way that people who are genuinely skilled at something are precise, no hesitation, no second-guessing, each move the product of full understanding rather than guess. The pieces watched them with ancient stone faces and moved aside with stony indifference, following the logic of a well-played game. On the other side Ron let out one long breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Harry agreed. The troll was already unconscious on the floor of the next chamber, Quirrell's work, efficient and brutal, the troll face down in a pool of something dark. They stepped around it. Then Harry stopped. "He's just ahead," he said. "Next room." "The logic puzzle," Hermione said. "Snape's lair. 7 bottles, only one gets you forward. Has he solved it?" She looked at the doorway ahead. Purple flame on the far side, black flame on the near. "He went through," she said. "The black flame is still active. He solved it. Or he used brute force," Harry said. "Brute force doesn't work on that specific enchantment," Hermione said with the authority of someone who had researched it thoroughly. "You need the right logic or you don't get through." She went to the table, read the riddle clue that Snape had left with the bottles, studied them for 45 seconds. "Third bottle from the left," she said. "Smallest one." Harry picked it up and looked at Hermione. "Go back." She blinked. "What?" "You and Ron. Go back through the chess room, back to the dog's chamber, and wait. When Bones's Aurors arrive, and they will arrive, they should be at the castle in the next 20 minutes if they mobilized when I sent the signal, bring them through. You know the path now. You know what's safe to pass." He looked at them both, serious and clear. "This part is mine." "Harry," Ron started. "I know," Harry said. "I know what you both want to do. And you've done it, you got me here, you crossed the board, you solved the puzzle. That's real. That matters." He held Ron's eyes and then Hermione's. "But what's on the other side of that flame is Voldemort. Not just Quirrell. Voldemort. And the reason I can walk through there and not be destroyed by it is the same reason it has to be me." He paused. "Guide the Aurors in. That's the job now. Can you do that?" Ron and Hermione looked at each other. The look lasted half a second, the specific, wordless communication of two people who have known each other well enough to have a shared language. 20 minutes, Ron said. If you're not out by the time Bones gets here, we're coming in. 20 minutes, Harry agreed. He drank the bottle. The black flame parted. He went through. The room beyond was circular and bare except for the mirror. The mirror of Aurors stood against the far wall, tall and ornate in its frame, the inscription along the top catching the low light. And in front of it stood Quirrell, both hands pressed to the mirror's surface, leaning in with the specific urgency of someone who can see what they want and cannot reach it. He hadn't heard Harry come in. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the scene and felt the double signal from Quirrell with perfect clarity now, two presences, one worn and frantic, one cold and focused. He could feel Voldemort's attention inside Quirrell's body like a stone dropped in water. He could feel the ripple of it. He took 3 steps into the room. Quirrell spun. His face was a different thing up close in this light. The nervous stutter, the performance of ordinary mild-mannered incompetence, all of it gone, stripped away, leaving something underneath that was simultaneously Quirrell and not Quirrell, a man who had made a series of choices that had led him to this room and was not at peace with any of them. "Potter," Quirrell said, and his voice was entirely different now. Flat, precise, carrying none of the theatrical stammer. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not," Harry said. "What are you seeing?" Quirrell blinked. "What?" "In the mirror." "What does it show you?" Quirrell's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter." "It does, actually," Harry said. He was still standing in the middle of the room, not advancing, not defensive. Just present. "The mirror shows you the stone because it thinks you want it but won't use it. But that's Dumbledore's assumption, that your desire is purely acquisitive. What are you actually seeing, Quirrell?" Something moved across Quirrell's face, the specific flicker of someone who is surprised to be asked a real question. "Myself," Quirrell said. Presenting it to him. Being the one who, he stopped. Caught himself. His expression closed. Being the one who mattered, Harry said. Being the person who finally accomplished something significant enough to be seen. He looked at Quirrell steadily. "That's not the stone. That's what you want the stone to mean. The mirror gave you the stone because that's what achieving it looks like from inside your desire." The silence in the room had a texture to it. Quirrell stared at him. And then the voice that was not Quirrell spoke, not from Quirrell's mouth but from everywhere, the room itself, a cold omnipresent thing that Harry felt in his sternum rather than heard with his ears. "Turn around, Harry Potter." Harry didn't turn around. He looked at Quirrell. "He can't come through you and speak to me at the same time," he said conversationally. "Not easily. The parasitic attachment doesn't work that way. He has to choose." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the room. "If you want to have this conversation, have it properly." A pause. Then Quirrell's body straightened, not in a way that was Quirrell, the posture shifting into something that occupied the space differently, that carried its presence differently. The eyes changed. The quality of the face changed. And Voldemort looked at Harry through Quirrell's eyes. "There it is," the voice said. From Quirrell's mouth now, but the voice was layered, doubled, carrying the specific resonance of something that had not had a real voice in a long time and was remembering the shape of it. The famous scar. The famous boy. A pause that had weight to it, calculation. "You're different from what I expected." "People keep saying that," Harry said. "The blocks," Voldemort said, and there was something in it that was not quite emotion, something more controlled than emotion, more deliberate. "Most of them gone now. I can feel the difference. The Dumbledore we knew would never have allowed," a pause. "He's lost control of his pieces." "He has," Harry agreed. "Is that good news for you or bad news?" The face tilted. Quirrell's face, inhabited by something ancient and cold and genuinely, dangerously intelligent. "Tell me what you are." "Not today," Harry said. "You came through 7 layers of protection alone. You are 11 years old. The voice had something in it that might, in another context, have been respect. I find I am curious about you. I know, Harry said. You were curious from September 1st. I felt it. He took a step forward. You came here for the stone. You need a body. You need the elixir. He watched Quirrell's face with Voldemort behind it. I'm going to tell you something true, you're not getting the stone tonight. The Aurors are 3 floors up and coming down. Whatever you do in this room in the next 15 minutes, you're not getting out of the castle with it. Then neither are you. That's not quite true, Harry said, and closed the distance between them. What happened next was not a duel. Dueling was a formal thing, structured, with rules and space and the particular grammar of wand work. This was a confrontation in a small circular room between 2 people, one of them not entirely one person, who had been in orbit around each other since a night in Godric's Hollow when one of them was a baby and the other made the worst decision of his long and terrible life. Voldemort sent Quirrell's hands toward Harry's throat. Harry sidestepped, caught Quirrell's wrist, and the contact produced something that neither of them had expected. Not Harry's plan. Not anything he'd calculated. His skin against Quirrell's skin, the magic he carried at full pressure against the dark attachment that was Voldemort, and the result was immediate and extreme. Quirrell screamed. His skin where Harry had touched it was blistering, not burned by fire, burned by something else, some property of Harry's magic that reacted to Voldemort's presence the way a chemical reaction reacts, immediate and irreversible. The same thing that had happened on Halloween 10 years ago, the same protection, his mother's sacrifice, the oldest and most powerful defensive magic that existed, soaked into him at birth and strengthened, not weakened, by everything that had tried to press it down. Harry held on. He held Quirrell's wrist and the burning spread and Voldemort inside Quirrell was doing something that Harry felt through the connection between them, thrashing, pulling away, trying to disengage from a host that was becoming untenable. He could feel it like a hand pulling out of a glove, the dark attachment trying to find an exit. Quirrell was screaming and collapsing and Harry kept hold because he understood, with the instinctive clarity of his recovered self, that letting go was worse. The Aurors weren't here yet. If Voldemort detached cleanly he'd find another host or another way and the next attempt would be better planned. Keep contact. Keep the pressure on. The magic Harry was running was enormous. He could feel his core engaged at a level it had never operated at before, pouring through the contact point with Quirrell the way a current pours through a wire, focused, channeled, specific. He wasn't trying to destroy Voldemort. He understood, from the prophecy, that destruction wasn't something he could do unilaterally, that the ending the prophecy described was a different thing from an 11-year-old burning a possession out of a defense teacher in a room under a school. What he was doing was forcing the separation. Making Quirrell uninhabitable. Voldemort pulled. Harry held. The mirror behind them caught the light of what was happening between them and in its surface, because the mirror showed desire, always, to whoever looked. Harry saw something he hadn't expected. In the mirror's surface he saw nothing about himself. He saw Quirrell, free. Not burning, not collapsing, just Quirrell, standing in an ordinary room somewhere, alone and himself and not carrying anything dark. That was what Harry's desire looked like from inside this moment. The dark attachment tore free. It was a physical sensation, the connection between them, the cold specific intelligence of Voldemort's presence, wrenching away from Quirrell and through Harry and past him, carrying with it a wash of cold that made every candle in the castle flicker simultaneously from the dungeons to the astronomy tower. Quirrell collapsed. Harry let go and stepped back and breathed. The room was just a room. The mirror stood in its frame. The stone was presumably still behind the mirror's enchantment, untouched. Quirrell was on the floor, breathing but not conscious, his face the face of someone who has been very far away and is trying to come back. Harry crouched beside him. Quirrell's skin was damaged but not fatally, not beyond what a good healer couldn't manage. He was alive. The dark thing was gone from behind his eyes. Harry felt it in the castle, Voldemort's presence departing, peeling away from the building the way fog peels from a hillside, dispersing. Not gone in the permanent sense. Gone from here. Gone from now. He sat down on the cold floor next to Quirrell and waited. 3 minutes later the door opened and Amelia Bones came through it, wand drawn, 2 Aurors flanking her, with Ron and Hermione visible in the doorway behind them. She took in the room. The mirror. Quirrell unconscious on the floor. Harry sitting beside him with his hands loose in his lap. "You held him," she said. "I held him," Harry confirmed. "The entity?" "Gone. Dispersed." He paused. "Not permanently. He still exists. But he's not here and he's not in a host." He looked up at her. "He needs the elixir to stabilize. If we secure the stone is already being relocated," Bones said. She was moving as she spoke, crouching to check Quirrell's pulse and condition, signaling one of the Aurors to stand over him. "I sent a team to contact Flammel last week. He's agreed to destroy it." Harry looked at her. "You were already ahead of this," he said. "I'm always ahead," she said, with the brisk precision of someone for whom this is simply a fact about themselves. She looked at him properly, the full assessment, head to toe. "Are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. "What happened, exactly?" "Contact," he said. "My magic and his attachment, it's the same protection that destroyed his body the first time. It didn't destroy him now, but it forced the separation." He thought about the mirror, about Quirrell's face. "He's not dead. But he's got less than he came with and no body and no stone." He paused. "That's a significant setback." "It's a significant setback," Bones agreed. She straightened up, looked at the room, at the mirror still standing in its frame. "Dumbledore needs to be here. He'll want to handle the mirror." "He can have it," Harry said. "It's not, that's his domain. I got what I needed." She looked at him. "Which was?" Harry thought about Quirrell's face in the mirror. His own desire, reflected back. He thought about the dark presence departing. He thought about what it felt like to run his full magic without flinching from it. "To know I could," he said. "To find out who I am when there's nothing in the way." Bones stood beside him in the room for a moment with the particular quality of silence that serious people share when something important has just been named correctly. Then she said, "Come out of the dungeons, Harry." What followed was not clean or simple or quickly resolved because nothing involving the Wizengamot, the Ministry, 2 international newspapers, Dumbledore's formal testimony, and the recovery of an 11-year-old boy from 10 years of institutional wrongdoing could possibly be any of those things. But it moved. Bones moved it. Quirrell was in St. Mungo's by sunrise, his condition stable, the parasitic attachment confirmed absent by 3 separate specialists. He was conscious by mid-morning and his first words, according to the aura present, were an expression of such profound and uncomplicated relief that the healer on duty had to leave the room for a moment. What Voldemort's occupation had been like from the inside was a story Quirrell would tell slowly and in pieces, and it would matter significantly to Bones's formal record of the conspiracy. The Wizengamot held emergency session on Wednesday. Bones presented the full case, the archive, the prophecy, Croker's testimony, the obstacle course, the night's events, in the specific organized way of someone who has been building toward this for months and knows exactly which piece goes where. Dumbledore sat before the Wizengamot and did not try to manage the room. Harry heard about this afterward from Susan, who'd gotten it from her aunt. He hadn't been there, deliberately not there, same logic as before, Bones's strategy of keeping him visible at Hogwarts, normal, unmanipulated. But Susan said that Dumbledore had sat in the chair and answered every question directly and had made no attempt to frame or soften or contextualize, and that this had been, in its own way, more disturbing to the Wizengamot than any amount of defiance would have been. A Dumbledore who defended himself was manageable. A Dumbledore who agreed he'd been wrong was something the chamber didn't have an established response to. He kept his position as headmaster. That had been the expected outcome. He had too much history, too much genuine achievement, too many people whose children had been safe at Hogwarts because of him. But the Wizengamot attached conditions. A permanent DMLE liaison at the school. An oversight board with actual authority rather than advisory-only status. Annual review of all decisions made under the headmaster's discretionary authority. Accountability architecture. The thing that had been missing. Croaker resigned from the Department of Mysteries. Harry was in herbology when he heard that. Susan passed him a note through Neville, who handed it over with the mild bewilderment of someone who has been delivering messages for 2 weeks and has stopped asking why. Harry read it, folded it, and spent the rest of the lesson thinking about the man with neat grey hair who had performed 20 of his obliviations with precise, sorrowful skill. Croaker had done it believing it was necessary. Had done it because the most powerful wizard in Britain had told him it was necessary, and Croaker was the kind of man who deferred to that kind of certainty. That was its own kind of tragedy. Separate from Harry's anger about it, which was real, there was the other thing, the way institutions produced people who were capable of great expertise and genuine care and still got it catastrophically wrong because they never questioned the framework. He wrote a note to Bones. Croaker's testimony on the methodology should be preserved completely. Not for prosecution, the resignation handles that. For the record. So it can't happen again without everyone knowing exactly how it was done. Bones wrote back in an hour, already in hand. You don't need to tell me my job. Harry wrote back, I know. I'm telling you I agree with how you're doing it. A pause, and then say that next time. He nearly laughed in the middle of charms. Clearwater came on the following 2 Saturdays. 6 blocks each session. Then the final Saturday, when she sat across from him and said, 11 left. We can do all of them today, if you want. Harry looked at her. Can you? I've been building toward this for 2 months, she said. Yes. The remaining blocks are the oldest ones, the first ones placed, when you were 18 months old, barely past infancy. They're the most deeply embedded, but the surrounding architecture has all been removed, which means they're exposed. Freestanding. The dissolution should be clean. She paused. What comes back from them may be pre-verbal. Not memories in the narrative sense. More foundational. Sensory. Who you were before language. Do it, Harry said. She raised her pale wand. The last 11 blocks came down in sequence, one after another, in a continuous session that lasted 2 hours and left the room looking like a place where weather had recently happened and then stopped. Every surface brightened, the air washed clean, an indefinable sense of pressure released. What came back was not memories. Clearwater had been right. Pre-verbal, pre-narrative, pre-language. It was like being given back the original version of yourself, before you had words for what you were, when you were pure self without story, the first knowing of magic, the first feeling of the world responding to your attention, the fundamental understanding that you and the world around you were not separate things but different expressions of the same thing. It was not dramatic from the outside. Harry sat in his chair through all 11, quiet, face calm, and the room changed around him in the way that weather changes before a storm, not violent, not threatening, just increasingly, undeniably present. The instruments Prakash had brought, the reinforced ones, all read their maximum. One stopped working entirely. The window didn't crack this time, it didn't need to, it simply opened, by itself, all the way, and the November air came in and moved through the room. When the 11th block dissolved, Harry opened his eyes. And the room, very briefly, was full of light. Not torchlight or sunlight, something intrinsic, something coming from the general direction of Harry himself and present for just a moment before it settled, drew in, became interior again. Clearwater lowered her wand. That, she said, with the voice of a woman who has been practicing for 31 years and has not lost the capacity to be astonished by the work, is what 72 blocks looked like from underneath. Is it done? Harry asked. His voice was the same. He was the same. He was also completely, utterly, in every layer, himself. No blocks. No gaps. No locked rooms inside. Just, him. The complete version. It's done, she said. Harry sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up and shook Healer Clearwater's hand properly, with both of his. Thank you, he said. You should know, what you've done for me, this whole autumn, I won't forget it. She looked at him with an expression that was professional and fond and just slightly overwhelmed. Don't thank me, she said. Just go be what you are. Yes, Harry said. That was always the plan. He walked out of the hospital wing and into the December bright corridor of Hogwarts, and the castle noticed. It was not subtle. Every torch in the corridor burned brighter. The stones under his feet had a quality, a warmth, a solidity, a recognition. He could feel the whole building the way he'd been learning to feel it for months, but now fully, clearly, without any static or suppression, every room, every staircase, every hidden space. The castle had been paying attention to him since September 1st, and now the attention was mutual. He walked toward Gryffindor Tower and took a route he hadn't taken before, drawn by instinct, and found himself in front of the portrait of his parents. James and Lily were both in frame, sitting together, his mother's head slightly tilted toward his father, and they both looked at Harry when he stopped in front of them with an expression that was, a lot of things at once. It's done, Harry said. His mother put one hand to her portrait mouth and said nothing. His father said, in a voice that was doing everything it could to stay even, how do you feel? Harry thought about it. Really thought about it, with the full instrument of himself, all of it available, nothing blocked or muffled or managed. Like the thing I'm supposed to be, he said. His father laughed, short, warm, broken slightly at the edges, and his mother was crying without any apparent intention to stop. James put his arm around Lily's portrait shoulders and looked at Harry with the complicated luminous expression of someone who is proud of something they didn't get to build and is proud of it anyway. Go on, then, James said. Go be it. Harry smiled at them both. He went. Ron and Hermione were in the common room when he got back. Not waiting, not hovering, Hermione was working on an essay and Ron was halfway through a game of chess against himself, both sides of the board, which he said kept him sharp, and they both looked up when Harry came through the portrait hole. They looked at him for a moment. All of them? Ron said. All of them, Harry confirmed. Ron looked at the chessboard and looked at Harry and said, with the specific intuition of someone who can read a position from any angle, you're different. Yes, Harry agreed. Also the same. Both. Hermione had closed her essay and was looking at him with the focused careful attention she gave to things she was working out. How different, she asked. Harry sat down in his chair, the one he'd sat in enough times that the fire knew to burn a certain way when he was there. He picked up the chess piece Ron had left on the arm of the couch and looked at it and set it back down. The wandless work, he said. I've been being discreet about it, like Shacklebolt asked. That's probably done now. He paused. The spatial awareness, the reading of things, that's much clearer. All the way clear. He thought about what else had changed, what was visibly different versus what was internal. My potions will be better, he added, and a corner of his mouth moved. That'll annoy Snape. Ron laughed. Hermione was still watching him carefully. Are you all right? She asked. Not, are you okay in the general sense? Are you all right? All of it gone, everything back, what does that feel like for you? She was asking the real question. She was always asking the real question. I had a dream when I was small, Harry said slowly. I don't know if it was a real dream or a memory, probably a memory. I was in the garden and there was music on the wireless and I reached for the volume and the music responded. And I woke up in the Dursleys' house and the feeling was gone and I spent years trying to remember what it was like. He looked at the fire. It's like that. Like remembering what it felt like and finding out you can still feel it. He paused. Permanently. Hermione let out a breath. Ron picked up his chess piece and turned it over in his hand. What happens now? He said. Voldemort's still out there. Not gone. Not gone, Harry agreed. Diminished, destabilized, without the stone. He'll find a way to come back eventually. The prophecy doesn't end with an 11-year-old running him out of a defense teacher. He looked at Ron. But eventually isn't now. Now is this year. This school. Learning everything there is to learn. He looked at them both, his two friends, the two people who'd been with him through all of it. I spent 10 years with nothing. I want to spend the next 7 becoming the most complete version of what I am. 7 years, Hermione said, and immediately got the light in her eyes that meant she was planning. There is so much to learn in 7 years. The Advanced Transfiguration curriculum doesn't start until 3rd year, but there's no reason we can't work ahead, and the charms applications for wandless magic have almost no published literature, which means there's genuine research to be done. Hermione, Ron said. What? It's December. Breathe. She took a breath. Harry laughed. Both of you, he said. Thank you. For all of it. The research, the chessboard, the treacle tart. He paused. Not the most dramatic gratitude list. I thought the treacle tart was a nice touch, Ron said seriously. Amelia Bones came to Hogwarts one last time before the winter break. She came on a Wednesday afternoon without Aurors, without the official red-robed formality, without Shacklebolt, though Shacklebolt was presumably somewhere in the general vicinity of Amelia Bones at all times, on the grounds of personal conviction as much as professional duty. She came in plain robes and met Harry in the same small room they'd used in the first week, and sat across from him, and put her notebook on the table and then didn't open it. How are you? She asked. Good, he said. And then, because she'd earned the fuller answer, really good. All 72 removed. No lasting damage. Clearwater's final assessment was clean. My core is developing normally now, which apparently at this rate is, he searched for how she'd phrased it, unprecedented. That's a careful way to put it, Bones said. Clearwater is a careful person, Harry said. She is. Bones looked at him. Something in her face was doing what it sometimes did, the professional layer doing its job while underneath it something more personal moved. What you did in that room. The confrontation with Quirrell. Yes? I want it on the official record, she said. Your account. Full and detailed. For the files. She paused. Also because what you did in that room, the mechanism you described, the way your magic interacted with the possession, is something the DMLE has no formal literature on. Your account becomes the literature. I'll write it up, Harry said. I'd appreciate that. She opened her notebook now, finally. The formal investigation is entering its final phase. Croker has given full testimony in exchange for immunity from criminal prosecution. The immunity was my call, not the Wisengamot's, and I'll stand by it. His testimony fills in the technical record completely. Dumbledore's formal testimony is scheduled for January. She looked at him. The case is solid. Every piece is in place. What happens to Dumbledore? Harry asked. The Wisengamot will make that determination, she said. My recommendation will be censure, oversight, and mandatory disclosure, meaning that any future decisions made under his discretionary authority must be documented and subject to review. She paused. No criminal charges. There's a reasonable argument for criminal charges, but the counterargument is that the intent was protective, the documentation shows consent from both parents however pressured, and Dumbledore's future conduct under oversight serves the public interest better than a trial. Harry thought about that. I agree, he said. She looked at him. You're not angry about that decision? I'm angry about what he did, Harry said. That's separate from what the appropriate consequence is. He met her eyes. He's going to spend the rest of his life being watched. His authority is subject to review. The version of himself that made himself the only one who could see the full picture, that version has been structurally dismantled. He paused. That's more meaningful than a trial. Bones held his gaze for a moment with the expression that had appeared periodically throughout the autumn, the filing away expression, the impression of someone cataloging something for a long time. Harry, she said, and her voice dropped slightly into something less official. I want to say something. Outside the notebook. He waited. What you've been through this year, what was done to you, and then what you chose to do about it, most people, most adults, would have been destroyed by one or the other. The thing done to them, or the weight of confronting it. She said it directly, without softening, the way she said all important things. You were neither. You were clear. Throughout. You stayed clear. He looked at her. You helped. I did my job, she said. Some people's jobs don't extend to caring whether it turns out right for the individual, Harry said. Yours clearly does. That's not just the job. That's you. A pause. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, looked at an 11-year-old boy across a small table in a disused room in Hogwarts school, and what was in her face was the thing that had been underneath the professional layer all autumn, fully visible now because there was no longer any reason to contain it, plain, specific, protective care. You're going to be something remarkable, she said. I already am, Harry said, simply and without arrogance, the way you state a fact about the sky's color. That's the whole point. She almost smiled, closer than she'd come all autumn, the real smile, just visible at the corner. She stood. Extended her hand. He shook it. Owl me, she said. About anything. Always. I will, he said. Thank you, Amelia. She paused at the door. You called me Amelia. Is that all right? A beat. Then, yes, she said. That's all right. And left. The last morning before the winter break, Harry stood on the roof of the astronomy tower in the cold blue early light and looked out at the grounds below, the lake frozen at the edges, the forest dark and breathing, the long white lawns of Hogwarts stretching to the perimeter walls. He could feel all of it. The castle around him and below him, its 1,000 years of stone and memory and paying attention. The lake and what lived in it, cold-blooded and old. The forest and its particular variety of alive. Hagrid's hut with its warm signal of someone straightforward and good. Gryffindor Tower with Ron's easy presence and Hermione's focused one. The staff rooms, McGonagall's particular quality of controlled warmth, Flitwick's cheerful energy, Snape's cold grief and complicated decency. The third-floor corridor, cleared now, the stone relocated, the dog rehomed with Hagrid's enthusiastic supervision. Quiet. Dumbledore's office at the top of its tower, he could feel that too, the old complex presence of a man sitting with himself in a new way, without the certainty that had kept him company for 80 years. And further, fainter, the cold dispersed trace of what had been in Quirrell, scattered now, diminished, present somewhere out in the wide world but without direction or body or plan. Waiting, as it always did. Building, as it always did. Harry would be ready for that, when the time came. He didn't fear it. He understood himself fully enough now to understand that fear was information, not instruction, and what he felt when he thought about Voldemort wasn't fear but the clean, settled readiness of someone who knows their own capacities and is not surprised by them. He thought about his mother saying you are extraordinary. He thought about his father saying go on, then. He thought about the hat screaming in a great hall full of people, and Amelia Bones coming through a side door with 8 Aurors, and Ron saving him treacle tart, and Hermione with 4 open books and a notebook and a pen, and Clearwater's pale wand moving in slow arcs, and the last block dissolving and the room full of light. He thought about 72. He raised his hand, bare, no wand, and the snow that had been falling lightly over the ground stilled in the air. Every flake. An entire sky of falling snow, suspended. He held it for a moment, thousands of individual crystals hanging in the cold blue air over Hogwarts, each one still and perfect and waiting. Then he let it go, and the snow fell, and the castle breathed, and somewhere deep in the foundations a sound moved through the stone that was too low to hear and too present to ignore. Harry Potter stood on the astronomy tower and felt the world and was felt by it, and was not diminished, and was not afraid, and was not hiding, and was not going to start. He went downstairs. There was breakfast, and 2 friends who were saving him a seat, and 7 years of becoming everything he was. He had a lot of work to do.